Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening, saving Kenneth the trouble of breaking in. He climbed the steps and entered the grand hall. I, Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald, 9th head of House Archibald, have come to call. Magus of Innsbruck, for the Holy Grail we both seek, let us stake our lives and honor in fair combat. Kenneth's voice echoed boldly through the hall. But the response he'd anticipated never came. No traps sprung. No magecraft lashed out at him. It was as though the brightly lit castle were deserted. How gaudy. In this age where mystery fades, has magecraft really been reduced to a vulgar tool for chasing hollow fame? A cold woman's voice echoed in reply. With it came the distinct click of high heels descending the stairs. At the top of the staircase opposite the main entrance, where the hall branched into a split platform, a silver-haired woman gracefully descended, hand resting on the railing. She turned elegantly at the landing. She wasn't an Innsbruck homunculus, but berserker. Kenneth inhaled sharply. He realized, belatedly, that he'd grown overconfident in his preparations. He'd automatically assumed that the enormous magical energy he'd sensed, on par with the servants, belonged to one. In reality, it had been Tenkai Shiomi, the master, fighting alongside Saber against Castor. Kenneth knew he couldn't win against a servant. But escaping alive? That was still possible. He began to activate the volume and hydrargy room to retreat. Only for the castle doors to slam shut behind him, sealed with a surge of massive magical power. Despite what I said earlier, Morgan spoke calmly from the top of the stairs, raising her index finger with a faint, amused smile. Since you've come here challenging me with your name and honor as a magus, it would be improper for me not to respond. 1 minute. If you survive my magecraft for 1 minute, I might just let you walk out of here tonight. After all, it had been Kenneth who ordered Lancer to attack Shiomi. Just the sight of him stirred Morgan's contempt. Yet now, she found satisfaction in her role as Shiomi's wife. If a wife handled everything for him, Shiomi might not find that appealing. So Morgan refrained from issuing a death sentence. Instead, she would let this arrogant man live, just long enough for Shiomi to deal with him personally. This is bad. The confidence Kenneth had moments ago vanished. He now understood. His only hope of survival lay in enduring this minute. Vollständig wird die Gang. Complete defense. Defense was the only option. Before Morgan had even finished speaking, he had already steeled himself, waiting in silence for the first attack. He activated the volume and hydrargy room, its mercury shield rising to meet whatever was coming. Chapter 29, A few too many guests tonight. At the same time, in another room of the castle, Garrett Suguamiya confirmed through the surveillance cameras in the main hall that Morgan had stepped up to confront Kenneth. Seizing the opportunity, he rushed toward Iris-Viel's room, intending to take the children brought by the naive Shiomi as hostages to force the enemy into using a command spell to make their servant commit suicide. However, the door is gone? Standing by the wall where the guest room should have been, Garrett Sugu found no sign of a door. He reached out and ran his hand along the wall, clearly sensing the flow of mana. Proof that a barrier had been placed here, one meant to disrupt sensory perception. So that's how it is. Garrett Sugu let out a bitter smile, grasping the situation. Garrett Sugu? Is that you out there? Iris-Viel's voice came through the wall. You're safe inside, Iris-Viel. Don't worry. Realizing the other side had thoroughly prepared, Garrett Sugu gave up on the hostage plan. At that moment, a line of text appeared on the wall, then slowly faded away. Only those free of sin may pass. He hadn't expected a barrier like this. A sharp wave of scornful anger rose in Garrett Sugu's chest. What he didn't know was that this was no ordinary barrier, but one of the 4 categories of magecraft Morgan specialized in. Mirror, coffin, garden, and tower. This one was called the Garden of the Innocent, the same type of magic used to imprison Merlin, the magus of flowers. Garrett Sugu had no time to delve into the details. Iris-Viel's voice still came clearly through the wall, so when she suddenly gave a sharp gasp, he immediately heard it. What is it, Iris-Viel? New intruders. They're approaching the castle from another route, Irisveil quickly informed him. Garetsugu let out a wry smile. This place is popular tonight. Garetsugu, the one coming. It's Kairai Kotamin. Irisveil confirmed it shortly afterward. That name gave Garetsugu a headache. Saber was fighting Castor, while Morgan remained in the castle to confront Kanath and protect Tenkai Shiomi's two adopted daughters. Given the situation, unless the new enemy threatened the children, Morgan couldn't afford to help. Mia and I will go. Garetsugu picked up the automatic rifle at his side. Even though he had always seen Kairai Kotamin as the most dangerous enemy in this Holy Grail war and kept his guard up, he hadn't planned on facing him this early. But just as Garetsugu had his eyes on Kairai from the start, Kairai had done the same. Seizing the perfect opening to infiltrate the Innsburn forest alone. It was a twist Garetsugu hadn't planned for, but at least now, he had nothing holding him back. If even he was barred by the barrier, Kairai Kotamin wouldn't be getting through either. Irisveil was safe, and Saber was locked in a brutal battle. With his resolve set, Garetsugu left the castle with his assistant Mia, heading into the forest to lay traps and prepare an ambush for Kairai Kotamin. Garetsugu and Mia breathed in the cold, damp forest air. It was a far cry from the Innsburn forest in Germany. He couldn't quite remember. How long had it been since he stood on a battlefield with such uncertain odds? 32, or was it 33? In under a minute, Artoria had fallen into a near berserk state, cutting down sea demons one after another. She'd lost count of how many had spawned by now. She could vaguely sense. This minute was turning out to be far longer than she'd ever anticipated. Glancing back at Shiomi, she saw his body stained with the blue-black ichor of the sea demons. Yet he remained unfazed, fully focused on preparing his magecraft. Castor was well aware of how dangerous Tenkai Shiomi was. Even if he dismissed the man emotionally, rationally he stayed on high alert. Gilles de Race drove his noble phantasm, the Prelate's spellbook, to its limit. Ignoring the disadvantageous terrain, he accelerated the summoning of sea demons to the point that even he himself was engulfed, leaving no clear opening for an attack. 46. Artoria firmly etched the number into her mind. The 46th one. Even with ample mana, she fought fiercely to carve out a circle of safety around Shiomi. But just as she was about to keep swinging her invisible blade, a sea demon lunged forward and wrapped a tentacle around her left wrist. With a roar, Artoria sliced it clean off. But that split second was enough. Another sea demon sprang at Shiomi from behind, ready to swallow him and the unconscious boy whole. Shiomi. As Artoria shouted in warning, Shiomi calmly clenched his fist and turned, casting a glance at the large sea demon behind him. Castor grinned with twisted glee, anticipating a surge of mana as the creature devoured Shiomi. Two brilliant flashes. Red and yellow. Cleaved the beast in half. Instead of sitting on the sidelines waiting to strike Castor at the perfect moment, Diarmid followed his instincts and leapt to the defense of Shiomi and Artoria. Lancer. Artoria was taken aback. Shiomi gave a faint smile. Brace yourselves for the mana shock, Saber, Lancer. He raised his hands once more. A single rune glimmered briefly in the air. Wild Thunder, Holy War. As he spoke, blinding lightning erupted from the void, engulfing the battlefield. Neither the sea demons nor Castor could escape its fury. Artoria and Diarmid instinctively drew close to Shiomi, relying on their magic resistance to shield themselves from the backlash of the Grand Magecraft. The sea demons couldn't endure the overwhelming magical surge. After brief, jerky spasms, they burst like water-filled balloons, scattering in every direction. Electric currents rippled across the blood-soaked, muddy ground. Grass and trees shriveled and blackened, the area left in the wake of calamity. This is... Diarmid murmured in awe. True Grand Magecraft, Artoria whispered. In less than 10 seconds, the lightning faded, leaving behind a devastated battlefield, with residual currents still crackling intermittently. As for Castor, he realized the battle had tipped out of his favor the moment the Magecraft activated and promptly withdrew. That, too, was likely part of his so-called perfect preparation. Since you stepped in just now, I'll let your master off for tonight, Lancer. Shiomi said indifferently, as though the destruction around him had nothing to do with him. Cradling the boy, he turned back toward the castle. Next time, I'll come to you. I'm deeply grateful. The moment he laid eyes on Tenkai Shiomi, Lancer understood exactly what kind of opponent Kanath had faced. And Shiomi, with a touch of mercy, had chosen to let them go. Unfortunately, it's not time to rest yet, my husband. After updating Shiomi on the situation in the castle, Morgan added the line with an air of casual cheer. Chapter 30, Garetsugu vs Kairai. Another reason Garetsugu Emiya didn't want to confront Kairai Kotamin so early was simple. He had virtually no tactical data on the man. Kairai had claimed he lost his servant and sought shelter from the Holy Church, staying out of the action on the surface. But in reality, he had been using the supposedly retired assassin to secretly gather intelligence all along. However, Garrett Sugu's prior investigations had convinced him that Kairai wasn't just an intel operative. During his time as an executor, Kairai had accumulated significant combat experience. After joining Tokiomi Tasaka's household, he spent 2 years studying magecraft. Once he acquired his command spells, he feigned a break with Tokiomi and left the Tasaka family. Someone like that, no matter what, should never be underestimated as a master. If possible, Garrett Sugu actually preferred for Tenkai Shiomi and Kairai Kotamine to clash first. Whoever won, it would work in his favor. And judging from Shiomi's unfathomable power, Kairai would almost certainly die in the encounter. That had been the plan. Until Kairai came knocking. With no way to confirm the state of Saber's battle with Castor, Garrett Sugu couldn't afford to pull Saber away to intercept him. Still, he figured the same limitation applied to his opponent. Garrett Sugu hadn't exposed any of his weapons, magecraft, or tactics. If he timed it right, this ambush could be a perfect opportunity to eliminate Kairai Kotamine. And, with him, assassin. Fighting on home ground gave him the advantage. Garrett Sugu had already set up a series of crude but effective traps meant to delay or constrain the enemy. The moment Kairai stepped onto the battlefield, automatic rifle fire rained down on him from the forest, triggered by magecraft-assisted mechanisms. But Kairai, a seasoned executor with ample battle experience and prior reconnaissance, had expected this. He knew Garrett Sugu would rely on modern weapons. Tools most Megas scorned. And had come prepared. Originally, Assassin had only reported that Kenneth's attack on the Shiomi household had failed. But upon hearing that Kenneth had redirected his focus toward the Innsburn forest, Kairai grew uneasy. If Garrett Sugu Emiya were to die here, the purpose of Kairai's participation in the Holy Grail War would be meaningless. Intent on facing Garrett Sugu himself, and unaware that both Tenkai Shiomi and Berserker were also present, Kairai infiltrated the battlefield alone. As bullets flew at him from all directions, Kairai dodged with practiced precision, flinging his black keys mid-motion. Clang. Clang. Crack. He heard the unmistakable sound of metal being struck and broken. He knew his black keys had hit a weapon. Nothing more. So, were these traps laid in advance? Was Garrett Sugu still holed up in the castle? Whatever the case, Kairai decided he had to press forward. Even if it meant fighting Kenneth, he had to stop him from killing Garrett Sugu. If Garrett Sugu was to die, it had to be by Kairai's own hand. After he got the answers he wanted, Kairai stepped over fallen branches and moved deeper into the woods. The moment his foot touched the ground again, another hidden rifle opened fire. Without even looking, Kairai dodged and hurled another black key, but this time it missed. He evaded several more shots in quick succession, the rifle rounds always just half a step behind, biting into the dirt and tree trunks behind him. Taking cover behind a thick tree, Kairai used magecraft-enhanced vision to scan the area. Then caught sight of the corner of a black trench coat. Kairai smiled faintly, then spoke. "I didn't expect you to come to the front lines yourself. Looks like Castor gave you more trouble than expected. Just relying on a servant clearly isn't enough anymore." Garrett Sugu didn't respond, and Kairai didn't expect him to answer a question like that anyway. Instead, as his voice faded, Kairai hurled 4 black keys from either side of the tree trunk. Spinning through the air toward Garrett Sugu Emiya, the blades, formed from mana, could, in skilled hands, function like shuriken with curved trajectories. Sensing the incoming attack, Garrett Sugu ducked forward at the last second to avoid them. Time alter. Double excel. His body reacted faster than his mind. The magic crest embedded in him activated the Emiya family's time-altering magecraft, generating an internal bounded field to accelerate his movements. To an outside observer, it looked like he had suddenly become unnaturally fast. And along with the flying black keys, Kairai himself launched into close combat. His brutal spinning kick struck a tree as thick as a man's torso, caving it in and bending it until it slowly gave way. Dust and dead leaves burst into the air, swirling chaotically. Kairai, still smiling to himself, watched as Garrett Sugu vanished once more into cover. That brief exchange had already made Garrett Sugu fully aware of Kairai's danger. Quietly, he signaled Mia to hold her position and wait. Firing prematurely wouldn't help. It could tip Kairai off to Mia's presence, and if he turned to attack her first, Garrett Sugu wouldn't be able to protect her. So that's how it is, Kairai murmured to himself again. His kick had missed not because he couldn't match the speed, but because he'd underestimated it. Now that he knew his opponent could double his movement speed with magecraft, he only needed to recalculate and adjust accordingly. Leaning against the tree, Garrett Sugu panted heavily. The strain from activating the magic crest was taking a toll on his body. He turned his head slightly, spotted Kairai still a fair distance away, and pulled a flashbang from his coat, preparing to create a diversion and retreat toward the castle. In a one-on-one fight with no prep time, the odds were stacked against him. He didn't believe even his trump card would hit Kairi in the dark. He yanked the pin. Time alter. Triple XL. With retreat and disruption both necessary, Giritsugu pushed himself to even greater speed. The instant the flashbang went off, he dashed toward the castle. If he could lure Kairi into the clash between Morgan and Kenneth, he'd have a chance to regroup. But he'd miscalculated one thing. Kairi's physical prowess. Though the flash and blast disrupted Kairi's vision and hearing, Giritsugu's footsteps still slipped through the noise. Kairi caught them. Then, at a speed even faster than Giritsugu's, Kairi caught up and, despite impaired senses, slammed a rock-hard hook into Giritsugu's chest. Thanks to his magecraft still being active, Giritsugu barely avoided a fatal blow to the heart. But he still heard the crack of ribs snapping, and the force of the hit flung him into a nearby tree. The pain left him unable to lift his weapon. As Kairi closed the distance, Giritsugu could only watch. Until he faintly saw Mia in the shadows, raising her gun. He had no way to stop her from taking that risk. But just then, as Kairi's vision and hearing began to return, he suddenly stepped back. From within the familiar flock of crows, Denkai Shiomi appeared. Chapter 31, Interception. Lancer's master had already withdrawn. This was confirmed after Tenkai Shiomi unleashed his grand magecraft, wiping out all of Castor's summoned sea monsters and severely injuring the summoner in the process, forcing Castor to retreat. After informing Lancer of this, Shiomi returned to the Innsburn castle with Artoria, carrying the only boy who had survived. The Great Hall was a mess. So much so that even Shiomi was at a loss for words. Morgan had shown no mercy when she went after Kenneth. Though Kenneth had relied on volume and hydrology room to escape from Morgan's relentless barrage. Despite her holding back, he had fled in disgrace, a far cry from the confident declaration of victory he'd made upon her rival. Seeing the extent of the damage, Shiomi regretted choosing the hall as their landing point during the return. Thankfully, Artoria didn't comment on it. She just looked mildly troubled by the wreckage. Still, Denkai Shiomi had no intention of footing the bill. Sure, he had made plenty of money. Enough to provide his two adopted daughters with a comfortable life. But that didn't mean he was willing to pay for the damage caused by other factions during the Holy Grail War. If the Innsburns tried to pin it on him, it would be a serious headache. Which was why his next move was to head to the next battlefield and assist Iris Veel's husband, Giritsugu Emiya. It was a favor he could leverage. To shut the Innsburn family up before they even thought of asking for compensation. Shiomi. Tenkai. Kairi's recovering vision allowed him to clearly recognize the familiar figure now standing before him. Shiomi made no move to attack. Sorry, but Saber's master asked me to save this guy. Let's send it here, alright? I see. So it wasn't just a ceasefire. You've actually formed an alliance. Kairi nodded in realization. That wasn't his concern. Tokiomi had believed Shiomi only needed a truce to focus on the Lancer faction, and Kairi had simply gone along with it. That's war for you. One moment allies, the next, enemies. Shiomi smiled faintly. It's been 4 years since we last met. After your wife passed, you left your child in my care. Kairi's face remained emotionless. Now that it's come to this, are you going to use that child to threaten me? Even if you were the one to suggest it, I'd never use Karin as a hostage, Shiomi scoffed. Though he'd adopted Karin out of loyalty to an old friend. That girl had become precious to him. He had no regrets about becoming her father. And you've been in Fuyuki for quite a while now. Now that we've finally met, don't you think it's time you paid your daughter a visit? Shiomi kept the tone light. Kairi lowered his gaze. That won't be necessary. Having entrusted Karin to Shiomi, Kairi no longer believed it was his place to intervene. Even if they were related by blood. As for Shiomi's decision to enter the Holy Grail War, Kairi saw no reason to blame him. You're as cold-blooded as ever, Shiomi narrowed his eyes. You really won't back down? Kairi silently assumed a combat stance, staring at Shiomi. I have business with that man. Don't get in my way. Even between old friends, there's nothing to discuss. Oh, really? Shiomi shifted slightly and slowly raised his right hand, placing it between them. Go ahead, Kairi said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Then let's see what you've got. The moment Shiomi finished speaking, Kairi lunged. They were more than 5 steps apart, but the tall, powerful executor closed the gap in a single movement. His footwork, which made it seem like he was gliding effortlessly across the ground, was known as moving stance. A secret technique of Bajikan. Clad in his priest's robes, Kairi slipped into Shiomi's guard like a reaper, fists crashing forward with full force, aiming for Shiomi's shoulders to disable his arms. No. This can't be. Giritsugu, still conscious, whispered to himself in a voice only he could hear. He had seen the force behind Kairai's strike. It was strong enough to kill any magus. But Shiomi had blocked it with just his right hand. Not only that, but at the moment of contact, he shifted his body, pulling Kairai's arm to the side, dispersing the force and redirecting Kairai's momentum away from him. Clench your teeth. Like swinging a flail, Shiomi twisted Kairai's arm, spun on the spot, and hurled him into the air. Kairai flipped midair and hit the ground, skidding back across the dirt before slamming into a tree and coming to a stop. A second later, Shiomi closed in with the same speed, rushing right up to him. His punch tore through the air with explosive speed and power, colliding head-on with Kairai's fist. The resulting shockwave shook the surrounding branches violently. Kairai still had one usable arm. He took the opening to throw a left punch, trying to seize the initiative. As an executor who had honed his body to its limits, Kairai had a clear sense of his own capabilities. Yet even so, he felt that Shiomi's body had gone beyond anything steel could compare to. Shiomi didn't block the hit. Kairai's punch landed squarely on his unguarded arm. But it felt like striking solid stone. Shiomi didn't budge an inch. Did he reinforce his body with runes? Kairai wondered silently. His punches were like cannon blasts, yet Shiomi intercepted every single one with even greater speed. Then, in a fleeting gap, Shiomi grabbed Kairai's fist and, leaping forward, caught the other incoming punch with his knee. This was exactly the close-quarters exchange Kairai had hoped for. But just as he tried to break free using a burst of internal force, pain shot through his clenched hand, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of bones cracking. The hardest part of his fist had been crushed. The pain was so sharp and unexpected that even after gritting his teeth, a low growl slipped out from Kairai's throat. Tenkai Shiomi had crushed the bones in Kairai's clenched fist. Repeating the same motion, Shiomi yanked Kairai up again, swinging him into the air. As Kairai came down, Shiomi's sidekick smashed into his abdomen. Blood spewed from Kairai's mouth as his body curled midair and was launched deep into the forest. A moment later, the sound of a heavy impact echoed through the trees. I might have overdone it. Am I getting jealous or something? Shiomi muttered to himself with a twinge of guilt. He knew Kairai wouldn't die. But maybe he'd struck too hard without meaning to. Was it because of Karin? Was it anger at Kairai for refusing to see his own child? Or maybe, as Karin's current father, did he feel the need to prove he was stronger than Kairai to feel justified in raising her? Shiomi shook the thought from his mind, feeling it was unfair to Karin. He turned and walked over to check on Kiritsugu. Seeing Mia supporting the unconscious Kiritsugu to his feet, Shiomi couldn't help but mutter. You had backup. And you didn't say anything. Whatever. Chapter 32, Strike While the Iron is Hot. How is Kiritsugu? Iris Veil looked at her husband lying in shock on the bed and asked Tenkai Shiomi, who was examining his condition. He avoided Kairai's vital strike, but his ribs and internal organs suffered varying degrees of damage. Shiomi's hand rested on Kiritsugu's chest. When he lifted his hand, a glowing rune remained behind. With this rune, he should be able to get out of bed and move around after a day or so, Shiomi said. As expected of a hereditary magus. The magic crest he inherited began activating the moment he was seriously injured, initiating self-healing. Even so, the healing effect was harsh and demanding. It first depended on the amount of mana the bearer possessed, and second, on the quality and level of the crest itself. If the wound had been fatal, Kiritsugu likely wouldn't have survived. Shiomi's rune could only maintain continuous healing under the assumption that he was still alive. Thank you very much. Iris Veil was at a loss for words. She knew her husband was wary of Shiomi, but it was a different kind of wariness than what he felt toward Kairai Kotomin. Shiomi's power was too unpredictable. It was best to avoid a head-on conflict from the start. Don't worry about it. I just wanted to do a favor. Shiomi shrugged. That way, I'm not liable for any damage to the castle, right? Iris Veil blinked, then gave a wry smile and nodded. Of course. With the Insburn family's wealth, damage on that level was hardly worth mentioning. But it was clear this master didn't think like a typical magus, so all Iris Veil could do was smile helplessly and accept the implication behind the gesture. Afterward, Iris Veil left Mia to look after Kiritsugu and accompanied Shiomi to the adjacent parlor. Artoria and Morgan were there, drinking tea. I heard Castor already took off. My husband's really something. He even had the time to help treat people from another camp, Morgan said gracefully, sipping her tea. Aren't you worried someone else might take Castor out first? I don't care who takes him out. It's not like I need another command spell, Shiomi replied, one hand on his hip. Besides, you're one to talk about being leisurely. Aren't legendary nobles supposed to be laid back? Morgan calmly glanced at him. So what, you want me to sit around doing nothing and wait outside? That's not what I meant. Xiaomi knew he couldn't win this exchange and turned his gaze to Iris v. Elon Artoria. As you heard, Castor escaped. He probably realized things were going south when I launched that wide-range magecraft and pulled back early. Artoria nodded. That was inevitable. Castor claimed to be fully prepared, so retreating intact was probably part of that plan. Talked all big, but that's all the courage he had, Xiaomi muttered. At that point, Iris v. El asked, then what now? With Castor still out there, he could strike again. And our alliance? Garrett Sugu had suffered grave injuries due to incomplete intel and a rushed engagement. Even if he recovered, he wouldn't be at full strength back on the battlefield. If possible, Iris v. El hoped to maintain this alliance for a while longer. At least until the others were eliminated. I don't mind. Lancer stepped in to help earlier, so I let Kenneth off the hook for now, Xiaomi said, then looked at Morgan. Would have been great if you'd finished him off right there. Wouldn't it be more satisfying to handle it yourself? Morgan accepted the jab with a cool smile. Seems I misunderstood. My husband prefers to let others do his work. Forget it. Xiaomi gave up. Morgan kept calling him my husband. At home, he could pretend not to hear it and let it slide. But now, in front of Iris v. Elon Artoria, every time she said it, goosebumps rose all over his back. He wasn't thick-skinned enough to shrug it off. Especially not with Artoria here. Someone directly connected to Morgan. Directly connected? Xiaomi suddenly froze. As the tension from the battle faded, the dream from the night before resurfaced in his mind. The end, the land of rain. What kind of place was that? There was no mention of such a place in the legend of King Arthur. But then again, legends were full of contradictions and vague accounts. So Morgan. What are you thinking about? Morgan asked, sipping her tea. Xiaomi snapped out of his thoughts and realized he'd been standing there lost in thought while everyone else was watching him. He glanced at the untouched cup of black tea in front of Artoria and thought, you two were going at it like storm and fire just yesterday, and now you're calmly drinking tea together. Guess your relationship isn't that bad after all. Nothing, just thinking it's best not to leave too much time for complications to arise, Xiaomi said as he turned around. Might as well deal with Lancer's master before dawn. My husband really is fond of battle. Morgan's tone was teasing, but she stood up without the slightest hesitation, making it clear to everyone just how in sync this master and servant pair truly were. Still, back-to-back battles are bound to wear us down. After taking on both Castor and that executor, do we really have energy left? Morgan brought up another important point. Xiaomi replied nonchalantly, same goes for Kenneth. If you hadn't gone easy on him, he'd be dead in the hull by now. Everyone's drained. Seems fair. Even if Kenneth had escaped with his life, the flurry of magecraft Morgan unleashed in just 1 minute had likely left him heavily exhausted just from defending himself. Putting aside that everyone was equally worn down, even if Kenneth were at full strength, Xiaomi had no doubt he could beat him. To Xiaomi, academic magi like that were just too easy to handle. Besides, having Kenneth constantly watching him was starting to get under his skin. He couldn't stand being stared at. In that case, I suppose I have no choice but to go along, Morgan said knowingly. But before that, I need to take Sakura and Karan home to get some rest, Xiaomi added. After that, we'll pay a visit to the Hyatt Hotel downtown. That was where Lancer's master, Kenneth, was hiding. Chapter 33, The assault approaches. Fuiuki City is split in two by the Mayan River. To the west lies the older, more traditional Mama Town, while the east is home to the rapidly developing Shinto, the economic heart of the city. The Hyatt Hotel, currently the tallest building in Shinto at 32 stories, stands as a symbol of this progress. The top floor of the hotel had been lavishly reserved by a single guest. Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald. At the moment, Kenneth sat in his room, his body battered and breath ragged. His servant, Lancer, knelt quietly at his side, just like a loyal knight out of a film or drama. Having served a lord in life, Diarmid could easily sense how foul Kenneth's mood was. He had just suffered a humiliating defeat. It was his second one. Despite all his meticulous preparation for the long-awaited Holy Grail War, Kenneth had suffered repeated setbacks, and the damage to his confidence was severe. A genius who had always stood head and shoulders above his peers. Whether among his family or within the Magus Association, Kenneth had never experienced true failure. No matter the challenge, he always outperformed others with ease. He had never been driven by a burning ambition or lofty goals. He simply excelled at everything he attempted. That was all. He'd realized early on that he was what people called a prodigy. But he never let it go to his head, nor did he take pride in it. He simply accepted his talent as the natural order of things and kept moving forward. He'd never known hardship or the fear of losing his edge. The young Kenneth had always been in full control of his world, and not once had he doubted that truth. An exceptional magus. the legitimate heir of the distinguished Archibald family. He had not only inherited their magic crest and generations of magical knowledge, but was also gifted with rare and extraordinary talent of his own. All of these facts gave legitimacy to his pride. It was no wonder he truly believed that nothing in this world was beyond his grasp. And that belief wasn't just his own. It was shared by everyone around him. Whether it was completing brilliant research at the clock tower or rising through the ranks faster than anyone before, Kenneth's path had always been smooth and unchallenged. Everyone naturally accepted it, because he was the renowned Lord Elmeloy. He was used to being called a child prodigy. Even if people envied or resented him, he never felt particularly satisfied or proud. This was simply the expected outcome of his life. That had always been the case. And his future success, too, had never been in doubt. To Kenneth, this was a sacred and inviolable pact. His contract with life. An absolute premise. Because the order of the world had always been so clear and self-evident to him, any rare and unforeseen inconvenience or coincidence that led to an unexpected outcome felt like utter chaos. An intolerable disruption, a blasphemy against the very order of existence. Like now. Twice in a row, Tenkai Shiomi had made a fool of him. The first time, Lancer fought alone and couldn't take down Shiomi. The second time, Kenneth misjudged the situation and, flaunting his prized mystic code, tried to challenge Shiomi personally. Only to run into Berserker. Kenneth had never thought highly of Tenkai Shiomi. He was aware of Shiomi's existence within the Mages Association, currently favored by the democratic faction's Valuala. After stepping down from his role as a sealing designation enforcer, Shiomi had continued to take on assignments as an independent magus. Though known as the disciple of the Grand Puppeteer and someone who had studied Age of Gods runes restored by Tuko Ozaki, Kenneth dismissed runes outright as a worthless, obscure field of magecraft. After all, the Mages Association was founded by Solomon's disciples. The king of magecraft himself. Rune magecraft, being a completely separate system with no ties to Solomon's lineage, had declined over time. That alone, in Kenneth's eyes, made it unworthy of respect. He had never interacted with Shiomi directly, nor had he ever reviewed the man's mission history. Even though, as Lord of the Clock Tower, he had full access to those records, he simply hadn't bothered. That was why this outcome was so hard to believe. So impossible to accept. A magus able to stand toe-to-toe with servants, even challenge that mysterious golden servant? A berserker who, despite being under B-rank mad enhancement, retained its sanity and could use magecraft on par with the Age of Gods? Each fact piled atop the next, and after nearly losing his life tonight, Kenneth had reached the peak of frustration. Lancer, what are your thoughts on the battles ahead? Kenneth asked. With all due respect, if our goal is to claim the Holy Grail and offer it to you, my lord, then for now, we should adopt a defensive stance. Wait as the others wear themselves down, and only then consider striking. Diarmid, casting aside his usual fiery spirit, gave his advice with calm composure. Now was no longer the time to seek out duels or uphold knightly ideals. This was a battlefield, pure and simple, where one misstep could mean death. Lancer was well aware that even without his intervention tonight in the Innsburn forest, the sea demon wouldn't have been able to harm Shiomi. He had only stepped in because he felt guilty for the ambush he had been forced into the night before. So even you think that's all we can do? Kenneth groaned, massaging his temples. There was no helping it. Lancer had been his backup plan. Kenneth had originally intended to summon the King of Conquerors, but after Waver stole the relic, he'd been left with no choice but to summon Lancer. And his odds of victory had dropped significantly. If the situation's against you, just admit it already. Stop pretending you're still in control. A woman emerged from the bedroom, her voice sharp with reproach. It was Solayui Nuadari Sophia, Kenneth's fiancée. Your opponent is an independent magus. You brought this on yourself by underestimating him and skipping the preliminary investigation. Solayui didn't hold back, directly pointing out Kenneth's blunder. Solayui. Kenneth didn't snap back at her. Instead, he looked hesitant, even conflicted. I looked into Tenkai Shiomi through my contacts in the association. He's not just doing odd jobs. He's been involved in sealing designations, and even cooperated with executors from the Holy Church. He is a battle-hardened magus. Of course, Solayui didn't mention that she'd first investigated him out of curiosity about a strikingly handsome magus around her own age. Though that vague curiosity had long since vanished with the summoning of Lancer. What remained now was hard intel. Sealing designation enforcer. Kenneth's frown deepened, but before he could say anything more, an alert rang out from the bounded field he had constructed as a makeshift workshop. Both Lancer and Solayui sensed it too. An intense surge of approaching mana. Chapter 34, The Broken Secret of the Twin Spears for Kenneth. The barrier's alarm signaling an intruder wasn't cause for panic. He even took the time to change out of his battle-soiled clothes and into a fresh set. Above the 30th floor of the hotel, there was no one else but Kenneth and his group. It was clear that a magical suggestion had driven all unrelated individuals away. Kenneth appreciated this kind of textbook magus conduct. Through the barrier and his familiars, he could clearly see who had arrived. It was Tenkai Shiomi, the same man who had been in the Innsburn forest just moments ago. Trailing behind him was his berserker servant, now fully armed. Although Kenneth had spent a large amount of mana earlier defending himself and fleeing the castle hall from berserker's assault, he was back in his workshop now. Even if it came to a drawn-out battle, he was still confident in his ability to win. He had paid handsomely to reserve the Hyatt Hotel's top floor and transformed it into a large-scale magical workshop. Of course, the transformation was magical rather than physical. He had set up 24 layers of bounded fields on the 32nd floor. Defenses so thorough they could be likened to a fortress wall of magecraft. In addition, he had 3 dedicated magical energy reactors to provide and replenish magical energy. As a countermeasure, he had also summoned dozens of evil spirits to replace traditional hounds as defensive entities. It was home turf in every sense. Kenneth sat in his chair, sipping champagne, calmly awaiting Tenkai Shiomi, who would inevitably be drained by the workshop's traps, to arrive before finishing him off. He was itching for bloodshed, and Shiomi coming to die at his doorstep couldn't have suited him better. Don't think that ceiling designation enforcers are the only ones who know how to fight. When it comes to real combat, I'm not inferior to any magus, Kenneth said to his fiancée. Normally aloof, Sola Yui offered him a gentle smile. Of course. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do. Her words only fueled Kenneth's fighting spirit. He had even timed exactly when to go out and face Shiomi. If Shiomi collapsed on the way up, killing him wouldn't feel like much of a victory. Worse, Sola Yui might look down on him for it. First things first. Check on Lancer. With that thought, Kenneth linked into his servant's vision and hearing to assess the battlefield. Lancer hadn't seen combat tonight and was in peak condition. He did feel slightly guilty about intercepting Shiomi like this. But it couldn't be helped. Avoiding battle now would be a betrayal of his master. When he saw Shiomi exit the elevator on the 31st floor, Lancer stood in the wide hall and gave him a slight nod. Berserker followed close behind, but that didn't bother Lancer. Servant versus servant, master versus master. That was the natural order. Understanding Lancer's silent permission to pass, Shiomi didn't hesitate. He simply said to Morgan, "I'll leave this to you," and walked past Lancer, heading upstairs. The elevator's access to the top floor had been disabled, so Shiomi had no choice but to take the stairs. Even though they were riddled with traps. Out of the corner of his eye, Lancer watched Shiomi vanish into the emergency stairwell before turning his attention back to Berserker. Her features were identical to Saber's. Only her hair and eye color were different. There was no doubt she was a servant with a blood relation to her. If that was the case, then last night's skirmish at sea may not have been hostile. It might have just been a mutual probe. A berserker and a magus. Lancer tightened his grip on his twin spears, his gaze locked onto the magical lance once used by Tenkai Shiomi. No declaration, no signal. The battle had begun. Lancer shot forward like an arrow, closing the distance with Berserker and thrusting his longer red spear. Clang. The weapons clashed, then locked again in close quarters. That Berserker could fight in melee came as no surprise. Lancer had anticipated it. As a spear-wielding servant himself, Diarmuid was genuinely pleased to face another combatant skilled with the same weapon. That alone made the battle worthwhile. There was no longer a need for tactical feints. The opponent had surely seen through the true name of his noble phantasm. No need for probing attacks either. The enemy was already at the gates. This was a battle to the death. Lancer's twin spears moved like the wind. Morgan didn't hold back either. The two exchanged fierce strikes, their weapons spinning and clashing in a fluid, relentless rhythm. Their techniques were too fast for the eye to follow. Within a single minute, they had already exchanged dozens of blows before parting once more. That spear work. Lancer's expression grew serious. Oh? As expected of a Lancer servant. Just one exchange and you could tell, Morgan said, holding her spear one-handed. So it really is, Lancer murmured, stunned. The answer was obvious. Morgan's spear techniques were identical to Tenkai Shiomi's. But who taught whom? Did the servant teach the master, or the master the servant? Either way, it made no sense. The reason was simple. Whether it was Tenkai Shiomi or Morgan, that level of mastery couldn't have been developed in the short time since the Holy Grail War began. It wasn't something one could acquire overnight. More than that, Morgan seemed to know exactly how to fight someone like Diarmuid, who used twin spears. Every time he tried to thrust at her with his red spear, Morgan would counter fearlessly with her own magic spear. It wasn't an attempt at mutual destruction. Lancer understood that clearly. Because he wielded two spears, he had to grip them closer to the center to control them one-handed. That meant even the longer spear had its reach compromised. Morgan, however, was different. She held her strange magical spear with both hands. It was longer than standard, and when she struck, she didn't need to wait for Diarmuid to land a blow. Just by gripping the end of the shaft, her weapon's tip could already reach him. No matter how many times he tested it, the result was always the same. I didn't expect to meet someone so familiar with anti-dual spear tactics. Diarmuid felt a mounting pressure. I assumed you weren't a close combat fighter. Seems I underestimated you. Somewhere deep down, I let my guard down. He had no interest in uncovering the relationship between Berserker and her master. It was irrelevant to him. Diarmuid withdrew his short spear and spun the red one a few times in his hand. Now that the secret of the twin spears has been exposed, I won't rely on luck anymore. Losing one noble phantasm was a handicap, but it was better than having his style completely countered. And dying for it. Lancer, Diarmuid shall face you with a single spear. Morgan gave a faint smile, her magical spear raised, its tip already trained on Diarmuid's head from afar. Chapter 35, Testing the Blade. Tenkai Shiomi pushed open the iron door to the 32nd floor emergency stairwell and stepped into the corridor, immediately sensing the signs of magical reconstruction throughout the entire level. This was unmistakably Magus territory now. With every step he took, the mana fluctuations from the layered barriers rippled against his senses. 23. Shiomi muttered. No. 24 barriers. Is Kenneth trying to turn this place into the Japanese branch of the Mages Association? As if in response, unstable magical energy slithered along the walls and ceiling, converging on him from every direction. It was an automatic magical attack, triggered by an intruder breaching the ward. Dark red lightning flared, surrounding Shiomi in a crackling storm of noise. Snap. With a snap of his fingers, the currents vanished completely. Are you seriously underestimating me, Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald? Shiomi said, continuing forward while tracing rune characters in the air. Each completed rune shimmered briefly before vanishing into nothing. Shiomi didn't mind precision work, but he had no intention of wasting time dismantling all 24 barriers one by one. Better to crush them in a single sweep. Kenneth, a certified genius, had of course prepared countermeasures to retaliate when the wards were destroyed. But the resulting magical attacks were far too flimsy for Shiomi. Not enough. Nowhere near enough. This level of mana output didn't even compare to the practical combat training he'd received under his mentor, Skathak, in the Land of Shadows. Every spell here reeked of that overly refined, textbook flair unique to clock tower instructors. Every step was by the book. Every trap, perfectly timed with the destruction of a barrier. And that's exactly why it didn't work. Shiomi dismissed it entirely. He wasn't a researcher. He had no interest in magical theory or dissecting spell constructs. From the very moment he'd first encountered magecraft, what he learned was how to fight with it. Using the Divine Age rune magecraft in a battle against modern magi might seem like overkill, but Shiomi had always wanted to test how far he could push it. Someone as brilliant and prepared as Kenneth. Surely he could handle it. With a grin of excitement he didn't even realize had crept onto his face, Shiomi extended a hand, gently grasped the air. Then clenched. The very space around him cracked, shattered, and then stitched itself back together as if reality itself had been momentarily torn apart. No. No way. Kenneth stared through the barrier, watching Tenkai Shiomi's movements via his familiars. He had been full of confidence. Planning a textbook defensive counterattack, ready to defeat Shiomi and prove his strength to Sola Ui, his ever-distant fiancée. But the 24 layered barriers he had so carefully prepared, meant to drain a significant portion of Shiomi's mana, had all been shattered in an instant. The top floor's defenses vanished without a trace, leaving Kenneth with no chance to repair them or even engage in a war of attrition. In that case, he swallowed his frustration and resumed his usual composed demeanor, raising his hand with deliberate calm. Dozens of demonic spirits surged from the shadows, brimming with magic. His watchdogs now unleashed. Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Their numbers were impressive, and their magical power far too high to be sustained by Kenneth and Sola Ui alone. So that's it. You even brought him on a magical energy reactor from the clock tower for the Holy Grail War? He muttered to himself. Well, of course. The Archibalds of the Elmeloy lineage. Prestige and wealth to match. Bringing a priceless artifact like that was just another advantage of being from such a house. While Shiomi was lost in thought, a hulking demon hound lunged at him. The beast, over 3 meters tall, bared its black fangs as it snapped its jaws at him. But familiars lacked true cognition. They couldn't comprehend why they suddenly couldn't move. Only Kenneth saw it clearly. Xiaomi had simply raised his hand and caught the hound's upper jaw mid-strike. He looked up slowly, a deadly glint flashing in his eyes. With a twist of his body, he swung the captured beast like a club, slamming it into another that had tried to ambush him from behind. In an instant, the hallway had turned into a bestial battlefield. Demon hounds, wolves, lions, leopards, tigers. The spirits had taken on the forms of vicious predators, each one brimming with speed and power. A single claw swipe could tear through reinforced concrete. Even a 10-meter gap was nothing to them. One pounce was all it took to close the distance. Those that had been knocked away quickly regrouped, encircling Xiaomi with slow, calculated steps. Magus weren't suited for close-quarters combat, which was exactly why Kenneth had prepared these familiars as a contingency. Then came another snap of Xiaomi's fingers. The signal triggered the beasts to strike. But before they could even leap, they were swallowed by a sudden iceberg that had erupted out of nowhere, their bodies crushed within it. Xiaomi spun and swept his hand outward. 5 streaks of lightning lashed out from around him, entangling the spirits that had dodged the ice. The moment they were struck, the familiars lost all strength, dropped to the ground, and dissolved into dark mist. Xiaomi watched it all with quiet indifference. He stepped forward, boots crunching over shattered ice as he made his way toward Kenneth's location. Of course, things wouldn't go that smoothly. The familiars weren't truly destroyed. Just repelled. More awaited him up ahead. In the dim corridor, the next wave of monsters began to rise, shifting from beast forms into humanoid ones. Oh? So they've got more than one form. That's a nice twist. Xiaomi slipped back with sharp reflexes to avoid a flurry of claws, then pivoted and delivered a straight kick with his right leg, connecting squarely. Amid the melee, the monsters began casting spells. Wind blades, water swords, magical projectiles. The elegantly decorated corridor of the Hyatt's top floor had become a ruined battleground in seconds. From the shadows, Kenneth was enhancing the familiars with his magecraft and coordinating their attacks. Still not showing yourself, Kenneth? Xiaomi shouted. After dodging several beasts, he landed at the far end of the hall. If you're that capable, then break through your familiars and come face me yourself. A ceiling designation executor's power should be more than this. Kenneth's voice echoed from the corridor, transmitted via magecraft. Is that so? Then I suppose I won't hold back. Xiaomi's voice dropped low, though in truth, he hadn't held back from the start. The monsters lunged from all sides, their charge reinforced by a flurry of long-range magical attacks. It formed a perfect trap. Walls closing in from every direction. Kenneth's heart pounded with excitement. This time, escape seemed impossible. SHHHK. The sharp sound of something being sliced snapped Kenneth out of his thoughts. The familiars were gone. Completely annihilated. Standing where he was, Xiaomi held a long spear in his hand. Its design bore a faint resemblance to Guy Dearg, Crimson Rose of Exorcism. Chapter 36, 5 against 1. Although he was known for wielding twin spears, Diarmid was by no means limited to a single fighting style. In life, he had possessed 4 weapons in total. Not just the red and yellow spears, but also a red sword and a yellow sword. When he deemed the battlefield particularly perilous, he would often enter battle with just the red spear and red sword. As a servant summoned under the Lancer class, Diarmid could no longer wield the dual sword Noble Phantasms, but that didn't stop him from fighting effectively with only his red spear. Morgan's spear technique was exceptional. So much so that Diarmid couldn't help but be drawn into the thrill of the duel before him. More than that, there was something in her movements. An unmistakable trace of Celtic warrior style. Diarmid didn't know Morgan's true name, but if she had been a servant with ties to the Celts, he would have recognized her. That left only one possibility: her master, Denkai Xiaomi, must have deep connections to the Celtic tradition. After all, even the ancient fort of the Forked Branch Formation was within his knowledge. Clearing his mind of all distractions, Diarmid's spearwork grew even sharper. Not only was he able to fend off Morgan's assault, he gradually forced an opening in her technique. Finally, he caught the critical gap. With a deft upward flick, he knocked Morgan's magic spear aside. "No mercy under my spear!" Diarmid shouted as he drove the red spear forward, piercing Morgan's chest. Blood sprayed from the wound. A lancer, indeed. "If we're talking pure technique, I was never first-rate," Morgan said as her spear slipped from her hand and clattered heavily to the floor. "Not at all. Your spearwork was magnificent. It reminded me of tales I heard in my youth," Diarmid replied sincerely. As fellow servants, he could feel it. Morgan's spirit origin was dissipating. It left a tinge of regret in his heart. He wondered if she had held back on using magecraft out of concern for the power of Guy Dearg, Crimson Rose of Exorcism, and his innate magic resistance. That possibility made the battle feel somewhat unfair to him. In the dim hall of the 31st floor, Berserker's body began to fade into transparency, then disappeared altogether. The sensation of his red spear embedded in her flesh faded along with it. Diarmuid remained where he was, gripping his spear in one hand, preparing to retrieve the yellow spear he had discarded earlier and return to his master's side. To help Kanath repel Tenkai Shiomi. Now that their servant was gone, a master alone was no real threat. Or so he thought. Until, before he could shift into spirit form, he felt a chill of murderous intent strike him from behind. A warrior's instinct honed through countless battles moved his body faster than thought. He spun and raised his spear to parry the attack. Who goes there? Attacking from behind is a coward's. Wait. Lancer's shout faltered into silence. What he saw stunned him. It was Berserker. The very same Berserker whose spirit origin had just dissipated was now standing before him, calmly retracting her magic spear. How? Is this possible? Lancer muttered, too shocked to fully form the words. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a trick of the light. That last strike was undeniably hers. Just as vicious, just as precise, aiming straight for a fatal blow. Lancer, you didn't really think beating one of me was enough to rest easy. Did you? The voice was unmistakably Morgan's. But it came from behind him again. Diarmuid turned. From the shadows emerged another Morgan. And then another. And another. Identical forms stepped out from the darkness at all angles. Same clothing, same face, same deadly magic spear in hand. Berserker. There's more than one? Diarmuid's voice trembled slightly. The hollow stillness of battle had vanished, replaced by confusion over the current situation. What's so strange about that, Lancer? I may have manifested under the Berserker class, but I'm also a magus. Morgan's voice carried a mocking smile, laced with sarcasm. And as a magus, things like clones equal to myself are entirely within reach. Facing the sight of 5 berserkers, Diarmuid flicked his toes and picked up the yellow spear he had discarded. The tide had turned once again. He could no longer calculate whether he had any hope of surviving against 5 berserkers. All he could do now was fight with everything he had, upholding the name of a knight. Then, fight to your heart's content, Lancer. Morgan, the only one standing empty-handed, spoke lightly before turning away and vanishing. Lancer had no way to pursue her. That had to be the real one. And that real one was now heading upstairs. Lancer could only hope that his master would grasp the situation and summon him with a command spell. Morgan ignored Lancer entirely, leaving the sounds of clashing weapons on the 31st floor sealed behind the fire door. She surveyed the chaos on the 32 and D floor corridor and confirmed that Shiomi was still safe. After all, the mana link between them remained completely unbroken. With that reassurance, the Fairy Queen walked unhurriedly through the wreckage. The magic used to create clones was exceptionally mana-intensive to activate and maintain. A magus typically had limited mana, so Morgan's ability to use such a spell so effortlessly spoke volumes about the exceptional caliber of her master. His magic circuit quality was rated A, with a composition marked as abnormal, and the quantity ranked at an X level. Even that wasn't the most remarkable thing. What truly set Tenkai Shiomi apart was his ability to draw mana directly from the greater source. Far beyond the capabilities of modern magi. Taking it all into account, the mana fueling Morgan's actions essentially came from the ambient mana of the world itself. The master named Kanath had brought a magical energy reactor to compensate for his own limitations. But to Shiomi, mana was like air. Freely available. Like breathing in oxygen, with every breath he took, he claimed the mana of the greater source as his own. In a sense, the greater source was Shiomi's magical energy reactor. Soon, Morgan spotted Shiomi standing in the hall on that floor, the red spear in his hand slowly fading away. As if the sight of the weapon stung her eyes, Morgan frowned in displeasure. If you needed a weapon, you could have just asked me. You need one too, don't you? Shiomi replied with a resigned look. Besides, I have my own. Last time, I just didn't want to disrespect your kindness. As he spoke, Morgan had already walked up to him. Since you're my husband, at least take my advice. Someone like you shouldn't rely too much on that spear. Rely, huh? Shiomi thought she was being a bit dramatic. To him, the spear was simply effective for taking out familiars. Anyway, I'll handle things from here. Just stand back and enjoy the show. That was my plan from the start. With that, Morgan changed back into her regular attire and adjusted her glasses. Chapter 37, Brand vs. Pride. Kanath Elmeloy Archibald had finally come to a realization. The Holy Grail War wasn't merely a contest of honor and life between magi. As its name suggested, it was a full-fledged war. Victory meant survival. Defeat meant placing your life in someone else's hands. Just like now. The 24-layer barrier he had always prided himself on was shattered like fragile glass by Tenkai Shiomi. The evil spirits and wraith familiars he believed were impenetrable were all annihilated. Without exception. by Tenkai Shiomi. In the past, Kenneth had always looked down on magi who specialized in actual combat. They didn't belong to any established faction. Just third-rate drudges used by the Mages Association for dirty work. As a noble of the association and a lord, Kenneth had always instinctively regarded the other masters in the Holy Grail War with contempt. Now, he finally understood the flaw in that thinking. Unaffiliated, self-taught magi often couldn't even attain the frame rank. Families who only joined the association after the Industrial Revolution, no matter how many generations passed, usually capped out at the cause rank. But Tenkai Shiomi held the pride rank. Something that required exceptional talent and extraordinary achievements. If he had been part of a recognized faction, it wouldn't be surprising if he had advanced even further. With his hands behind his back, Kenneth stood in the room. His mystic code, Volumen Hydrargyrum, was already deployed. Automatopertum Defensio, Automatopertum Quaerir, Dlectus and Crisio. His fiancée, Sola Ui, had agreed to remain in the room at his insistence. Kenneth himself now stood as the final line of defense. Should he summon Lancer back to defend? Kenneth glanced at the 3 command spells on the back of his hand, still hesitating over the decision. There was no time left to observe Lancer's battle against Berserker. Volumen Hydrargyrum had already detected Tenkai Shiomi's presence and initiated the assault. Mercury, the heaviest substance at room temperature, driven at high speed and pressure, produced enormous kinetic force. Its shape could shift instantly into whips, blades, or spears, their sharpness surpassing that of lasers. Akin to a super high-pressure water jet. The walls of the corridor groaned under the strain, shrouded in smoke and dust. Kenneth felt the mercury sharpen into a blade and strike its target. He never expected to defeat Tenkai Shiomi with a single blow. He merely hoped to deliver a shock. Something to tip the scales and gain the upper hand on his own ground. With his barriers and familiars lost too quickly, all Kenneth had left were the 3 magical reactors he'd brought, his last defense against mana depletion in this high-stakes battle. Control over fluids. If I recall correctly, your attributes are wind and water, aren't they? Shiomi emerged from the haze of smoke and dust, and once Kenneth caught sight of him clearly, he was left speechless. Volumen Hydrargyrum had transformed into high-speed blades, striking relentlessly, yet each attack halted right at the edge of impact, as if performing in a play. Never landing a single blow. Scalp! Kenneth shouted. The mercury split into countless blades, all hurtling toward Shiomi. Even under Kenneth's direct control, none of the blades could reach him. It's useless, Shiomi said calmly. The 3rd of the primordial runes. Rune of Anti-Enemy. Under its effect, all weapons dulled and became unwieldy, rendered ineffective. No matter how Kenneth ordered or controlled them, Volumen Hydrargyrum failed to strike Shiomi, let alone deal any meaningful damage. Fortunately, Kenneth was already in full combat mode. The erratic attacks from the mercury were merely a distraction to obscure the field of vision while his magic circuits ran at full throttle, drawing mana from the furnaces, and then a dense fog coalesced in midair, blending with the smoke to block both combatants' sight. The temperature plummeted. Far colder than any natural winter. Shiomi's body heat stood out starkly in front of the mercury-based mystic code, making him look like a perfect target. Gales began swirling through the enclosed space. Wind and water. Kenneth's innate magical attributes. With mastery over both, deploying ice-based magecraft was child's play. Now wasn't the time to showcase his encyclopedic magecraft knowledge. Kenneth went straight for the most familiar elements, minimizing chant time. With just his magic crest and the mana furnaces to assist, he launched a large-scale spell at full force. He had seen Shiomi's ice magic the night before in the warehouse by the port. While impressive, Kenneth believed his own power. Fully unleashed. Far outmatched it. Eyes, Vifuri mean feigned. A violent storm erupted, countless 6-pointed snowflakes sweeping across the 32nd floor of the hotel. He intended to trap Shiomi. No way forward, no way back. Shiomi raised his hand, already watching frost form on his fingers. In the blink of an eye, ice crystals crept across his entire body at a speed visible to the naked eye. Water froze on contact. A single breath turned into frost. This was indeed the genius of the clock tower, the of Lord the Mineralogy Department of the Mages Association. Shiomi slowly closed his eyes. In an instant, he was completely entombed in solid ice. Like a prehistoric man frozen in a glacial tomb. Through the clear, colorless ice, Kenneth saw Shiomi open his eyes again, staring straight at him. Scalp. Kenneth gave the order again. This time to shatter both Shiomi and the ice completely. This was the Holy Grail War. A clash between magi meant life or death. Even if the Mages Association wanted to fault Kenneth for this, they wouldn't have a case. Then he noticed Shiomi's lips move slightly. He was saying something. What? Begging for mercy? You didn't run when I unleashed my grand magecraft, and now you're scared? Kenneth sneered. Too bad. You're too much of a threat. You've already cost me far more than I'm willing to forgive. Before the words had even finished leaving his mouth, a small red light flickered within the blizzard. A light the size of a clenched fist, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then it erupted. The blazing glow burst through the storm barrier, devouring the dense snow and howling wind, surging toward Kenneth in a flash. Realizing something was wrong, Kenneth immediately recalled his Mercury mystic code for defense, encasing himself inside just in time to block the inferno and avoid being incinerated. Shiomi wasn't begging. He was casting a spell. A single word was all it took to activate the fire element Grand Magecraft. Titanomika. Chapter 38, Life and Death. He stared at Kenneth, now sealed inside a seamless sphere of mercury. The flames licked helplessly at the surface, unable to penetrate even a fraction of the volume and hydrargyrum. However, standing within the heart of the fire, Shiomi folded his arms and watched the mercury sphere intently. Mercury was inherently toxic. For Kenneth to use it in a mystic code, he must have suppressed its poison with mana, or perhaps relied on his magic crest to mitigate the risk. Under normal conditions, the danger posed by volume and hydrargyrum could be safely ignored. But what if it was subjected to sustained heat from a fire-based Grand Magecraft? Shiomi didn't know the answer. Carefully, he stayed alert for any signs of mercury vapor leaking into the air, waiting for Kenneth's reaction. Using fire to counter ice was a risky move for any magus. If one's control wasn't strong enough, it would only backfire. Suddenly, the hotel's fire alarm began to blare. Shiomi blinked, then let out a silent sigh. At this rate, the fire department, and probably the police, would be arriving soon. With a flick of his index finger, he traced a symbol in the air. The seventh of the primordial runes. The rune of fire suppression. It diminished and restrained flames through incantation. Extinguishing fire was just its most basic application. At the same time, the mercury sphere surrounding Kenneth began to crack open slightly. Wind. Kenneth was about to invoke Wind Magecraft when his breath caught. And then he started coughing violently. He clutched his mouth, hacking repeatedly. When he pulled his hand away, his once white glove was stained with blood. A wave of soreness crashed over his body, hitting his head and abdomen with sharp, inexplicable pain despite no external injuries. Mercury. Poisoning. Kenneth realized immediately. Volume and hydrargyrum was, without question, a masterwork of offensive and defensive design. One he had always taken immense pride and confidence in. But today, he had miscalculated. He hadn't anticipated that Tenkai Shiomi would ignore the elemental disadvantage and retaliate with Flame Magecraft. In the heat of the moment, he had instinctively thrown up a defense. But even volume and hydrargyrum couldn't fully resist the spell. Vaporization had begun. Just moments ago, Kenneth had been engulfed in a high-concentration cloud of mercury vapor. Completely unprotected. I thought you'd know better than to overlook something like this. Shiomi couldn't help but mutter. As expected from an academic. Once they step out of their study rooms and lecture halls, they fail to account for the ever-changing conditions of the battlefield. After a brief internal grumble, he slowly raised his right hand. Panterai. Gale winds turned into blades, converging from all directions as they tore toward Kenneth. Vertidigung. Kenneth rasped hoarsely, gasping for air. Volume and hydrargyrum spun rapidly, deflecting the incoming wind blades, but Kenneth couldn't manage his mana efficiently. Cracks began to form on the mercury's surface under the strain, sealing only slowly after each strike. It was only a matter of time. Kenneth wouldn't be able to sustain the mana needed to maintain the shape of volume and hydrargyrum. His defenses were crumbling under the pressure of the storm. The mercury squirmed sluggishly along the floor, gathering like slime, awaiting its next command. Dark circles formed beneath Kenneth's eyes. He felt his focus slipping, his physical coordination faltering. Someone, please. Help me. His survival instincts kicked in, pushing him to desperately seek aid. As if his plea had reached the heavens, a hand gently rested on his back. What a useless man, cornered by his own mystic code, Sola Ui said coldly, though her hands were already casting healing magic. Shiomi stood silently, watching the pair. He knew they were engaged. And yet, nothing about them resembled the bond between fiancés. It was cold. Clinical. A partnership between magi, nothing more. He couldn't help but glance toward Morgan, who stood in the shadows. Morgan looked away with a face that clearly said, "Don't look at me. I'm not like that." It was true. Even if she was just toying with him, the warmth Morgan showed in her words and actions toward Shiomi was something completely absent between Kenneth and Sola Ui. How could this be? A servant and master who had only met 3 days ago were more in sync than an engaged couple bound by vows. Shiomi felt his heartbeat spike. A wave of breathlessness surged through his head. For a moment, He thought he was affected by mercury vapor and quickly activated his mana to shield himself. But no. He had already used the second of the primordial runes for personal protection. This level of environmental degradation couldn't affect him. What are you doing? Get back to the room, Sola Ui. Kenneth wailed in panic. You'll get yourself killed out here. What are you talking about? You're the one who fought poorly. If you die, do you think I'll be safe? Sola Ui replied flatly. The man who had been boasting only moments ago now looked utterly pitiful. Sola Ui found herself increasingly disgusted with Kenneth. If not for the fact that Lancer would withdraw if Kenneth died, she wouldn't have lifted a finger. At the very least, she needed to get her hands on those command spells. Shiomi watched them with a cold gaze. A strange pity welled up inside him. He slowly raised his hand. A red spear materialized in his grasp. The spear is me, and I am the spear. Kenneth, still receiving treatment, felt the surge of mana from Shiomi's weapon. He immediately realized Shiomi wouldn't let him recover quietly. That red spear, so similar in appearance to Lancer's noble phantasm, radiated danger. His instincts as a magus screamed at him. No. It wasn't just similar. It was a noble phantasm, wielded by a living being. Certain kill. Soaring spear of piercing death. Gaibolg alternative. Danger, Sola Ui. Volstandij Vertidigung. It was too late. Kenneth shoved Sola Ui aside and forced his mana to reanimate Volumen Hydrargyrum into a shield, trying to block the red spear. Pointless. The mercury that should have been as sturdy as castle walls was pierced like jelly, sliced through with a crisp, clean sound. The red spear shot from Shiomi's hand. Kenneth was hurled backward, flying past the stunned Sola Ui and pinned to the wall behind her. The heart. Always the target. Once launched, it could not miss. It's actually. Staring at the spear embedded in his chest, eyes filled with disbelief, Kenneth finally understood the weapon's true name. But he was too late to speak it. His breathing stopped. Shiomi turned away slowly as the soaring spear of piercing death retracted. Kenneth's body slid from the wall and crumpled to the floor. Since Kenneth had tried to kill him, there was no need to hold back. He'd gladly take his head. Whether one lived or died now depended on their own strength. Behind him, Sola Ui finally processed what had happened. Staring at her fiancé's lifeless body, she let out a raw, anguished cry. Chapter 39, Reward for the deadly duel. The battle on the top floor of the Hyatt Hotel had undoubtedly already come to the attention of the Holy Church. So even as the alarms blared, Shiomi knew the church would take over swiftly, handling the cover-up and clean-up. Now, all that remained was for him to evacuate the hotel with Morgan. But before that, one final obstacle stood in their way. The Lancer-class servant. At this moment, Dirmurdaduabn was a bloodied wreck. His light armor hung in tatters, his exposed skin was covered in wounds, and blood soaked his entire body. He looked as if he had just crawled out of hell. He leaned on his red spear with his right hand, barely managing to lift the yellow one with his left. One of his eyes was swollen shut, blood streamed from his forehead, smearing half his face, and crimson stains lingered at the corners of his mouth. "You're still alive?" Shiomi asked with genuine respect. Lancer had no legend of fighting on despite mortal wounds, so as a servant, he shouldn't possess battle continuation. Which meant what brought him back to the top floor wasn't skill or magic, but pure will. A resolve to fight until his spirit origin burned out, or perhaps a long-held vow. "Just to be clear, I didn't hold back," Morgan murmured with an inaudible sigh. The 5 clones she had left behind should have been enough to kill Lancer downstairs. Yet he endured, destroyed every one of them, and dragged his ruined body up here after them. "Of course. I just fought with everything I had." Lancer's voice was growing faint. In just a few minutes, his existence would vanish completely. His master, Kenneth, was dead, and his spirit origin was nearly spent. Though Kenneth had deciphered the Holy Grail summoning ritual in Fuiuki and entrusted mana supply to his fiancée, Sola Ui, the only master Lancer recognized was Kenneth. "Your master has already fallen. There's no need for you to fight anymore," Shiomi said with a slight sigh, eyes downcast. "Yes. I know." Lancer managed a faint smile. Even battered and bloodied, Diarmid still radiated the striking charm of a true warrior. He cast a brief glance at the weeping Sola Ui. Though he had given his all to get here, only to find Kenneth already slain, a strange sense of peace and quiet satisfaction took hold in his heart. Lady Sola Ui, who had never truly liked Kenneth, might finally have realized the value of something precious. Only after witnessing him sacrifice everything to save her. So Lancer thought to himself. But he forced himself upright and let the yellow spear fall from his hands. If my lord fought until the very end, then a knight must follow him unto death. He dragged his battered body forward, gripping the red spear with both hands to steady himself. In his condition, he could probably manage just one more strike. Whether it would be enough didn't matter. This Celtic hero was simply doing what he believed in, fulfilling his duty to the very end. I understand. Shiomi answered quietly, spreading his hand to summon the soaring spear of piercing death. It was a parting gift from his master. An actual noble phantasm still existing in the world, not one bound to a servant. He had never used it as a catalyst for two reasons. First, because his master, Skithak, could never be summoned. Second, because Shiomi simply didn't wish to summon her. To him, this spear was one of his trump cards. Yet as soon as he extended his hand, the black magic spear fell neatly into it. He turned to Morgan. She handed him the weapon in silence, her expression unreadable, eyes steady and unwavering, offering no room for refusal. With a quiet nod, Shiomi gripped the spear one-handed, turning his body to point its blade straight at Lancer's forehead. The air on the ravaged top floor was thick with the scent of blood and fire, clinging to his senses. And slowly, Denkai Shiomi's heart grew still. Everything was silent. His palm was dry, the magic spear fitting perfectly into his grasp. Crack. The sound of crumbling plaster from the ruined wall became the cue for battle. Lancer's eyes snapped open, shining with a deadly light. He charged forward with all his strength, the tip of his spear weaving an erratic path as its blade flashed with cold brilliance. He heard the slicing of air, like the hiss of the fiercest serpent lunging at its prey. But what Lancer saw was Shiomi's form dissolving into a blur. From that blur, a blade pierced the air in a straight line, whistling sharply as they passed each other. More blood spilled, splattering across the floor. Lancer's red spear slipped from his grip, clattering to the ground. The pool of blood beneath him slowly expanded as a Lancer collapsed to his knees, utterly spent. Beautiful, he whispered with his final breath. Shiomi gripped the upper shaft of the magic spear and gave it a sharp flick, casting the blood onto the floor. You're too kind. Morgan, who had silently observed the battle, slowly walked up beside Shiomi. Without a word, the two of them turned and left together. Lancer felt his consciousness fading. The strike from Shiomi had completely shattered his spirit core. Even with 3 command spells remaining, he could no longer continue the fight. Lancer had lost. But in that moment, he felt a sense of peace. In life, he had failed to serve his lord to the very end. But now, in death, as a servant, he had fought beside his master until the last moment. It would be a lie to say he had no regrets. In life, he had never known defeat, yet as a servant, he hadn't claimed a single victory. He hadn't been able to present a single triumph to his master. He hadn't even protected him. His master had died in battle, just the same. War is merciless. The tides of battle are ever-changing. The Holy Grail War had gathered heroes from across time. He simply wasn't strong enough. That was all there was to it. He saw Sola Ui faint from the shock of everything that had happened. He wanted to offer one final gesture of respect as her subordinate, but the short distance between them, barely 10 meters, might as well have been an uncrossable chasm. He couldn't move another step. The darkness was slowly torn apart by the first glimmers of light. Diarmuid opened his eyes one last time. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows atop the hotel, he saw this distant city, far removed from the time he once lived in. Greet another morning. And suddenly, Diarmuid felt as if he saw Princes Grain, Fi and Mac come hail, the members of the Knights of Fianna. If he could, he wanted to tell his old comrades about these past 2 days of battle. About the foes who had far exceeded anything he could have imagined. First, let me begin with the warrior who appeared before me like the great god Odin himself, cloaked in crows. Having begun the tale in his heart, Diarmuid gave a faint smile at the thought, then vanished into the soft morning light of Fuiuki. The Holy Grail War. Second night. Lancer, defeated. Chapter 40, Calm after battle. Lancer had been defeated, taking down the first group of enemies. Even after a night of constant combat, Shiomi was in high spirits from the victory. He felt no fatigue at all. When he returned home, dawn had just broken. Yet it felt as if it had been ages since he'd last been there, and he immediately got to work preparing breakfast for the family. You're already busy with daytime chores without even resting? Morgan leaned against the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, watching him work. Lancer's defeat will probably be reported by the Holy Church soon. The Holy Church possessed spirit boards that monitored the Holy Grail War, used specifically to detect when servants were defeated. I know. But the war has to go on. And so does life. Shiomi grilled blue mackerel in the oven. Sakura and Karan won't be able to go to school for the next few days. I'll call in for them. Say there's a family emergency. Even without being told, Morgan understood. She didn't argue with his attitude, simply continued the topic of the Holy Grail War. There are 2 other things you probably haven't noticed, she said with a confident smile. What things? Shiomi asked, listening attentively. First, the man you rescued is the true master contracted with Artoria. That homunculus is just the nominal master. I know. The command spells on Garrett Suguemiya's hand already gave that away, Shiomi replied. After all, he went to the Insburn family 9 years ago. This is just a tactic to conceal the true master. Second, Morgan said, the homunculus from the Insburn family is the lesser Holy Grail for this Holy Grail war. That's why she was the first to react when Lancer was defeated. Shiomi blinked. So they gave the lesser Holy Grail a human form. He had reviewed the records of previous Holy Grail wars and found no such precedent. Most likely, the Insburns had learned from past failures and decided to change their strategy. Well, considering the Fuiuki Holy Grail was built by the Tasaka, Matu, and Insburn families, it's not surprising the founders would retain certain privileges. Shiomi didn't dwell on the deeper implications. For example, what fate awaited a homunculus who served as the vessel for the Grail as the war progressed? That wasn't something he could influence. And besides, she had her own will. She didn't need anyone's misplaced sympathy. Besides, Castor failed in his assault last night. That servant clearly isn't the type to charge in blindly. Shiomi flipped the mackerel over to grill the other side. We need to move quickly. Before there are more victims. At this point, aside from assassins still working from the shadows, only 4 groups are capable of acting, Morgan said. As for the command spells gained after the battle, they're not worth worrying about. She paused, then looked at Shiomi. By the way, did the master of that assassin you drove off escape too? No. He was probably rescued by his own servant. Shiomi shook his head. After seeing Miyahisa emerge, he had gone after Kairai, but by the time he arrived, only signs of Kairai's impact with the ground remained. He had only lost an arm. Something that could be healed with magecraft. And given the training executors endured, he'd probably already be back on his feet and ready to fight again by tomorrow. Originally, Shiomi had hoped to neutralize Kairai completely, taking him out of the Holy Grail War. After all, if he ended up having to kill Kairai during the war, he'd need time afterward to recover emotionally. So he could keep caring for Karin without baggage. Now it seemed that wouldn't be possible. Still, last night had been a success. Not only had they dealt with the Lancer faction, they'd also managed to rescue a boy from Castor, who Shiomi quietly left at the police station on the way home. Thinking about this, Shiomi placed the crisped blue mackerel onto plates and brought the food to the table. Another morning began as usual in the Shiomi household. Sakura and Karin, ever diligent, got up on their own as always. Thanks to the magecraft cast over them the night before, they had slept especially well. They woke up refreshed, full of energy. Not going to school today either? Sakura looked surprised as she asked. It's a bit inconvenient right now. I feel better having you both stay close, Shiomi apologized to the two of them. As a little compensation. How about I take you to the amusement park today? Sakura's eyes lit up instantly. Really? That's great. You haven't slept all night. Are you sure you're not going to drive the whole family into the Mayan River and feed us to the fish? Karin remarked coolly, pointing out the obvious concern. Shiomi froze. How did you know? Your face gives it away. Karin blinked innocently. That sent Shiomi rushing to the bathroom, where he stared into the mirror, checking his face again and again. He knew full well that pulling an all-nighter wasn't healthy. But given the circumstances, he had used magecraft on himself after returning home to make up for the lack of sleep. It was just a stopgap measure. If he relied on it too often, he might end up looking like some kind of ethereal spirit. Maybe even find himself drifting back to the land of shadows one day. If that happened, his master would definitely have a good laugh at his expense. Shiomi splashed his face with water. His complexion looked perfectly fine. Rosé even, full of energy. Nothing's wrong. Don't go scaring people, he muttered, grumbling at Karin. Karin blinked again. I was just guessing, but... Wow, I was right. You really don't have to push yourself, Dad, Sakura said gently, her excitement now turning to worry. She looked like she might turn down the outing. Shiomi cleared his throat. It's fine. If I say I'm fine, I'm fine. Exactly. Don't worry. If something does go wrong, I won't mind stepping in to save everyone, Morgan said smoothly. Karin nodded. In that case, there's nothing to worry about. If Mother's coming too. Sakura nodded eagerly. Shiomi's mouth twitched, and he gave a dry laugh. He wanted to ask Morgan what secret technique she had used to get Sakura and Karin on her side in just 2 days. But neither of them showed any signs of magecraft interference, so he had to swallow his baseless suspicion and mutter, You too. Can't you just hope for something a little more cheerful? Chapter 41, Where the Heart Lies, 1, Shinto. As the more modern area of Fuiuki City, supports the city's economic lifeline. Despite being separated from Mamatown by just the Mayan River, it has developed at a rapid pace. Many new establishments open in this district. And since the bus ride from Mamatown to Shinto doesn't take long, many residents choose to live in Mama while working or spending their weekends in Shinto. The amusement park in Shinto has become one of the most popular weekend destinations for Fuiuki citizens. I wouldn't have guessed. Everything looks so peaceful. Morgan leaned against the fence, gazing toward the carousel. Sakura and Karan were riding two wooden horses, laughing alongside the other children. The Holy Grail War has always stayed in the shadows. Whether it's the Mages Association or the Holy Church, both sides are committed to hiding the existence of the supernatural from the world, Shiomi said casually. If they ever failed to keep it under wraps, the war would probably be shut down entirely, with both sides intervening. It sounds like you're talking about an illegal underground operation, Morgan said with a faint smile. Who knows if it's legal or not? It's not like I can go ask Tokiomi Tasaka about it, Shiomi replied with a wry smile. He'd probably think I'd lost my mind. After the offhand comment, Shiomi turned toward Morgan. Sorry. I don't recall anything you need to apologize for, Morgan said with a smile. Unless you've been sneaking around behind your wife's back. In that case, sorry won't cut it. Shiomi rubbed the bridge of his nose. That's not what I meant. No need to worry. It's rare to have a moment to breathe. Spending time with your kids isn't a bad thing, Morgan added, smoothly shifting the conversation. It was clear Morgan had picked up on what Shiomi hadn't said yet. You really are a witch, Shiomi joked. Well, since you've called me that, maybe I should show you some real witchcraft, Morgan replied. Shiomi was at a loss for words, trying to come up with a retort, when the carousel slowly came to a stop. Two adorable girls hopped off the ride and ran toward him, shouting Daddy. Shiomi quickly stepped forward to greet them. That's when he noticed they were drawing more attention than usual. It was never this noticeable before. If there was a reason, it likely had something to do with Morgan being with them. So, Shiomi and Morgan took Sakura and Karan to a cafe inside the amusement park, sat down, and grabbed something to eat to recharge. Time flew by at the amusement park. They'd left in the morning, let the girls enjoy a few rides, and before they knew it, it was already past noon. You're usually so quiet, never asking for much, Shiomi said to Karan as he held his coffee. But it turns out you can enjoy an amusement park too. Karan nodded. It was really fun. Especially the roller coaster. You liar. You were screaming just like me, Sakura said, looking at her in disbelief. That's what made it fun. Karan, munching on a slice of cake loaded with whipped cream, added, just hearing everyone else scream was enough to make me happy. Sakura was left speechless. Ahaha. So this is where it leads, Shiomi said, glancing at Karan with a hint of concern, though his tone stayed gentle. It's not a good thing, is it? Karan asked. Shiomi paused, frowning before giving a wry smile and shaking his head. I don't know. You don't know? Karan looked at him curiously. But you're my dad. You're an adult. How can you not know? What do you think? Shiomi smiled. Well, judging by Sakura's reaction, I guess it's not a good thing. Karan, only 5 years old, already showed a surprising level of awareness. But people aren't obligated to feel sad about someone else's pain or happy about someone else's joy. Shiomi shook his head. What people need isn't good things, but a good tomorrow. Those are two very different ideas. Morgan, who rarely spoke at times like this, raised an intrigued eyebrow. Go on. I'm just stating a simple truth. Shiomi looked into Karan's golden eyes, answering her seriously, doing his best. Everyone's more or less the same, and yet completely different. What's good to you might be bad to someone else. That's all there is to it. After he finished, he realized his explanation still felt lacking. He gave a sheepish smile. He didn't feel like a qualified adult. It wasn't hard to say the ethically correct answer. What was hard was truly believing it. And then saying it. If even he couldn't believe it, would Karan believe him if he told her? If I had to put it into words, I'd say most people just can't accept feelings like yours. He picked up a napkin and gently wiped the cream from the corner of Karan's mouth. At least until you cross a certain line, I won't blame you. Karan gave a slight nod but didn't reply. You really are an unqualified adult, Morgan commented lightly. I've never claimed otherwise, Shiomi said. I just try to do my best, because for some reason, I have to. That's what being their father means. Even though he really didn't know what he was doing. All he knew was how to give them something better. Relatively speaking. Be it magecraft or daily life, it was all the same. Care to share the reason? Maybe your daughters would find it interesting, Morgan said, picking up the thread of the conversation. Shiomi responded with a practiced smile. And what good would that do? Come on. I've got no regrets. I really don't think I've failed as their father. It was clear he'd been asked similar questions by many people before. They might have been neighbors, teachers, or store clerks. In the end, this was the answer Shiomi arrived at. Morgan understood that now. So what do you two think? Am I a good dad? Shiomi asked with a grin, though his voice was lacking confidence, as if one reply could shatter him. Then came 2 nods and 2 pairs of bright eyes. It was the first time he'd asked something this embarrassing. Shiomi had been nervous. Now, he felt a lot more at ease and sipped his coffee again. If you ask me, you girls really shouldn't spoil him too much. He's going to get full of himself, Morgan teased breezily. You seem to have a lot of complaints about me, Miss Morgan, Shiomi muttered. Morgan flashed a flawless smile. Not at all. I've been quite satisfied with my husband from the very start. They went on teasing each other like this, snacking as they wandered through the amusement park. Chapter 42, Where the Heart Lies, 2. They really are just kids, Shiomi said, glancing in the rearview mirror at Karin and Sakura, who had fallen asleep leaning against each other. Morgan smiled faintly. It's good for children. When they're happy, they go out and play. When they're tired, they fall asleep. While other kids their age are still stuck in school, their parents sneak them out to have fun. If people knew, they'd probably be envious enough to call it unfair. That's not such a bad thing, is it? Shiomi said sincerely. At the very least, today, both Sakura and Karin were able to enjoy themselves. You seem to worry about Karin in a completely different way than you do about Sakura, Morgan pointed out. Shiomi gave a small nod. In a lot of ways, yeah. Especially her personality. There's just something about it that keeps me on edge. Maybe it's just an inherent flaw, Morgan said. Inherent, huh? Shiomi's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. There's no need to dwell on it. Human beings are fragile and incomplete by nature. Most people are born with some kind of flaw. What they grow into depends mostly on the people around them. Morgan's words carried a quiet reassurance. It was as if she were saying, if she's your child, she won't turn out wrong. Shiomi wasn't sure where that confidence came from. Maybe it was because of her different experiences. Maybe she could see farther than he could. I appreciate the sentiment, he said with genuine gratitude. But I wasn't just talking about her personality. Karin's constitution is also unusual. Besides having magic circuits, she has a body that reacts to spirits. Morgan shifted the topic. I know. You do? Morgan looked a bit surprised. It seems to be something she was born with. After Kyra entrusted her to me, I started noticing strange signs. I did some research and confirmed that it's a masochistic spiritualist constitution. If she gets too close to something like an evil spirit, stigmata will start to appear. Shiomi spoke seriously. But don't worry. Even when she was still an infant, I already applied protective runes. Unless that protection is actively dispelled, not even the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse could touch her. Looks like I forgot. You've always been that kind of thorough man. Morgan's tone was knowing. Shiomi found it odd but didn't ask further. Instead, with a hint of regret, he changed the subject. Still, with everything going on today, I doubt we'll be able to hold our Magecraft lesson tonight. There'll be time, Morgan said easily. True. Shiomi nodded. It's hard to find such an exceptional teacher. I really don't want to waste any of it. In that case, maybe you shouldn't have taken them out to play in the first place, Morgan said. Then you wouldn't be wasting any time. That won't do. If you don't enjoy life when you're supposed to, that's the real waste of time, Shiomi said firmly. Morgan agreed wholeheartedly and nodded silently. The car turned a corner and stopped at a red light near the Fuiuki tram station. Just 2 more turns and they'd be on the Mayan River Bridge. After a full day out, Shiomi could feel the fatigue setting in. He planned to get Sakura and Karin settled once they got home, then soak in a bath to unwind. With how tense his nerves were, he wouldn't be able to face the escalating Holy Grail war without some rest. Huh? He glanced toward the station exit, letting out a surprised sound without thinking. Following Shiomi's gaze, Morgan saw a young girl with twin pigtails walking out of the station alone. She looked about the same age as Sakura. If that were all, Morgan would have just assumed Shiomi was reminded of something. But the object the girl held was faintly glowing. The light was weak due to the distance, but Morgan could still sense the presence of magical energy. A child carrying a mana detector. Morgan murmured. Shiomi gave a definitive answer. She's Tokiomi Tasaka's eldest daughter. Sakura's sister before she was adopted by me. Rin Tasaka. No wonder. Morgan looked at her with mild curiosity. So that's the eldest born with affinity for all 5 elements? The Tasaka family found a fine inheritor. That's not important right now. Shiomi watched as Rin jogged out of the station, heading down the road toward Shinto. Tokiomi sent his wife and daughter to his father-in-law's for safety before the war began. Why would she be out here at a time like this? Children with talent in magecraft are always drawn to abnormal situations. Especially during the Holy Grail War, Morgan replied. That's true. Shiomi still felt uneasy. She was Sakura's sister. If the two of them ever reunited in the future, Shiomi wouldn't stop them. But if something happened to Rin now, and Sakura found out later, send a familiar to follow her. He opened the window and released a crow, which flew after Rin. Soon, Shiomi found out Rin had snuck out late at night to investigate the disappearance of one of her classmates. In other words, it was connected to Castor. Unfortunately, Castor's master had already fled by the time Shiomi was ready to act. A real expert at running away. But it was clear the master hadn't given up after Rin ruined their child abduction plan. Castor soon sent a sea demon to ambush Rin as she tried to quietly leave with her rescued friend. Through her mana detector, Rin realized the sea demon's magical energy far exceeded her own. Fear rooted her to the spot. Footsteps approached from behind. She turned instinctively, but before she could see who it was, Shiomi used magecraft to knock her unconscious. Shiomi picked up Rin and turned to leave. Behind him, the sea demon was reduced to ashes by rune magecraft in an instant. Of course, Rin sneaking out didn't go unnoticed by her mother, Aoi Tasaka, who rushed to Fuyuki in a panic. Shiomi, having quickly deployed his familiars, took Rin with him and found Aoi. She's fine. I just used a little magic to put her to sleep. Shiomi handed Rin back to her mother. You're? Aoi froze for a moment before recognizing him. In any case, letting a child come to Fuyuki so late at night isn't like the Tasaka family's usual prudence. Shiomi crossed his arms. When Mr. Karaya gets back and hears about this, he'll probably have a good laugh. Yes. You're right. Aoi looked remorseful. Thank you, Mr. Shiomi. I'm truly grateful. Don't mention it. I just happened to be there. Shiomi waved it off. Still. She's Sakura's sister. I wouldn't want to face Sakura in the future without doing something. Hearing her younger daughter's name, Aoi froze. She had given Sakura up to inherit the magecraft path. She wasn't supposed to ask. But her motherly instinct compelled her. Is she doing well? She's doing very well, Shiomi said with a hint of pride. Especially with magecraft. Her teacher is far better than anyone at the Tasaka residence. His friendly tone brought some relief to Aoi. That's good to hear. There wasn't much more she could say. At least, Sakura was living well in the Shiomi household, and that was enough. After sending off the Tasaka mother and daughter, Shiomi returned to the roadside. Morgan was leaning against the car door, waiting. You got out of the car? Shiomi felt a little awkward. It's nothing. Morgan watched as Aoi's car disappeared from the other side of the park. I didn't expect you to step in directly. I thought you'd just contact the Tasaka family. I acted on impulse. She's Sakura's blood sister, after all, Shiomi said honestly. Is this also something you did for a better tomorrow? Morgan asked. I think so. Shiomi paused, then smiled sincerely. Chapter 43, The visitor arrives with a roar. After taking a bath, Shiomi finally felt the fatigue gradually rising. He put a towel around his neck, changed into his home clothes, and stepped outside, but couldn't see Morgan anywhere. Both children were asleep in their respective bedrooms. They were already able to sleep on their own, which meant that Shiomi didn't have to worry so much most of the time. He looked around the room casually and eventually found Morgan sitting on the floor facing the garden, her feet resting on the green stones of the courtyard, gazing off into the distance. The winter air flowed into the room through the open glass windows, but it wasn't particularly cold. From here, one could see the garden behind Shiomi's house, as well as the night sky. Earlier, the sky had been overcast, but it had now cleared completely. The nearly full moon and countless stars shone brightly, illuminating the entire courtyard. Moonlight spilled over the fairy queen like a fine, chilly snowfall, giving her an almost melancholic appearance. What a nice garden. It doesn't look like much, but the more I look at it, the more I like it, said Morgan. He hadn't intended to disturb her alone time, but since Morgan spoke first, he stopped and listened. If you're not in a hurry to go to bed, stay and chat with me for a while, Morgan invited him. Shiomi sat down silently beside her and looked up at the bright moon in the sky. He could touch her shoulder if he shifted slightly. But he didn't feel unsettled by that. Was it thanks to the winter night, or had he simply gotten used to it? Even though he was sitting so close to Morgan, he felt an unusual sense of calm, quieter inside than usual. It's a good place to live alone, Morgan said. A Magus's workshop often reflects the personality of its owner. From that perspective, you strike me as the reclusive type. Shiomi pursed his lips. But I'm not just a Magus. I'm also a person. No matter how much I try to avoid the world, It's impossible to separate myself from it and live entirely alone. This is that kind of place. Morgan nodded lightly in approval. To put it in more general terms, it has a human touch. As she said this, she turned to him. Shiomi hadn't been deliberately looking at Morgan's face, but when their eyes met, he realized she'd been smiling all along. The expression wasn't as warm as the winter sun, yet not as cold as eternal snow. It was a smile only Morgan could show. Shiomi stared, forgetting to respond. Especially those two children, Morgan continued. They may have naturally disrupted the original structure of this workshop, yet rather than weakening your identity as a magus, they've made something even more complete. She didn't seem to expect an answer and slowly turned her gaze away. As you said earlier, people are incomplete. Shiomi lowered his head, looking at the grass and scattered stones in the courtyard. That's why we need someone to fill in what's missing. Yet, even with that thought in mind, you still chose to participate in the Holy Grail War. Morgan looked at the command spell on the back of Shiomi's hand. Shiomi raised his hand and smiled at the command spell. What if I said it wasn't my own decision? That one day, the command spell just appeared. Not as a holy stigmata, but fully formed from the start? Morgan looked at him and nodded. So, because you received the command spell, you had to fight? Even if you don't have a wish you want the Holy Grail to grant? Is that not allowed? Shiomi smiled, lips pressed together. I'm not the only magus entering the Holy Grail War with that mindset. Kairiko Tamine. Waver Velvet. Kanathel Meloy Archibald. None of the masters Shiomi knew had a clear wish. The latter two entered the war more for personal glory. To prove the strength of their beliefs. Then let me ask you this. If you win in the end and get the Holy Grail, what wish would you make? Morgan looked into Shiomi's eyes. It can be wealth, power, fame, or even something a little tacky. I can't choose just one? Shiomi raised his eyebrows. You can say you want everything. Morgan shook her head. Or maybe you're actually a very serious magus who wants to use the power of the Holy Grail to reach the swirl of the root? Morgan's questions weren't forceful, but every word struck straight at Shiomi's heart. He didn't have any wish that needed the Holy Grail to come true. Nor did he bear any pain so deep that only an omnipotent wish-granting device could resolve it. But if he had to find a reason. Not some mission forced upon him by a certain entity, but a desire of his own? It did exist. Yet even as he acknowledged that, Shiomi still questioned whether that purpose was truly necessary. If he could, he would rather bury the thought deep inside, unknown to anyone. Until the moment it could quietly came to fruition. Unless even the deepest part of his heart was laid bare. Suddenly, without warning, Morgan grabbed Shiomi's wrist. Her expression turned sharp, alert. Shiomi immediately sensed it too. Though the stars and moon were still visible overhead, a distant rumble of thunder was slowly drawing closer. The magical energy riding the storm quickly became distinct. It was clear who the visitor was. Shiomi raised his hand, breaking the barrier to leave an opening wide enough for someone to pass through. The barrier had been so roughly torn open that repairing it afterward would be more troublesome than just starting over from scratch. Either way, it was a serious nuisance. That sound, rumbling through the air, was the roar of Ryder's noble phantasm, the Gordius wheel. Perhaps sensing the barrier open, and taking it as a welcome, the ox cart noble phantasm followed the guided path and slowly descended onto the spacious lawn behind Shiomi's house. It doesn't look like you're here to fight, Ryder. Shiomi remained seated, not moving. But the king of conquerors on the cart rubbed his chin, looking mischievously at the master and servant sitting close enough for their shoulders to touch. Did I come at the wrong time and interrupt something fun? Iskander grinned broadly, flashing his white teeth. Maybe I should come back later. Shiomi glanced toward Artoria, who was dressed in a suit and leapt off the ox cart with Iris Veil in her arms. Since you came so well prepared and backed off the moment you were told to leave, that's exactly why I find it suspicious. Shiomi stood up from beneath the eaves, stepping barefoot onto the wooden floor. Insburn, are you planning to abandon our alliance and side with Ryder's camp instead? Chapter 44, A Host's Courtesy Banquet. Shiomi was taken aback. Shiomi didn't know of any banquet plans, so it was clear this must have been something the self-indulgent king of conquerors had decided on his own. Hiding behind Ryder's massive frame, Waver looked at Shiomi and Morgan with an expression that teetered between fear and hostility. But Shiomi could clearly read the words written all over his face. I want to go home. Yes, a banquet. With that, the king of conquerors, clad in faded jeans and a plain white t-shirt, hoisted a large wooden barrel from the ox cart. There was no mistaking it. It was a wine barrel. So, you're here to find someone to drink with? Shiomi and Morgan exchanged glances, once again reminded of how spontaneous and bold the Macedonian king could be. That's right. I'll borrow your courtyard. That shouldn't be too much trouble, right? Carrying the barrel, the king of conquerors leapt down, and the ox cart noble phantasm vanished into thin air. Shiomi turned away. Wait here. Then the two groups of uninvited guests really did wait in the garden for nearly an hour. Shiomi didn't return until a full hour had passed. He had thrown on a coat to keep warm, but he hadn't gone to change. He had gone to the kitchen to prepare food to go with the drinks, along with some blankets for sitting. On normal days, Shiomi often shared portable meals in the garden with Sakura and Karin. Things like handmade sandwiches, fresh bread, and baked treats. It was thanks to that habit that Shiomi realized he wasn't entirely helpless in domestic matters. He could still handle some housework. The colorful spread of food helped Artoria, who had been on guard, relax as her eyes lit up. Iris Veal still looked a bit fatigued, but her overall mood was quite good. Wow! This is really something. I threw together this banquet on a whim, but you? Who's providing the venue? Ended up doing the cooking yourself, Iskander said in admiration. You knew it was last minute and still didn't send out a notice? Shiomi shot back. Is it normal in your country to hold banquets without any formalities? For once, the towering man was left speechless by Shiomi's jab. He gave an apologetic smile. That's a harsh but fair critique, Iskander said, lowering his head. Then issue a formal apology. Shiomi kept up the banter but didn't press the issue further. After all, even someone as rough as the King of Conquerors wouldn't try to throw a party during the Holy Grail War without a deeper motive. So? Did something good happen that made you come to my house to eat and drink for free? Shiomi asked. Iskander, who hadn't originally come for that reason, seized the chance to boast about his master's achievements. You probably haven't heard, but my master managed to find Castor's workshop using simple alchemy. So I set out to attack it. Castor was defeated too? Shiomi asked. No, the guy wasn't there. If he was, I'd have executed him on the spot, the King of Conquerors said without a hint of shame. Waver, arms folded, picked up a sandwich and took a bite. It was just a cheap trick. Nothing worth bragging about. What do you mean? Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Iskander gave a rough explanation. Waver had extracted water from different sections of the Mayan River, analyzed it for residual magical traces, and pinpointed Castor's workshop that way. The more he spoke, the more flustered Waver looked. Understandable, considering such a method probably wouldn't impress a top-tier magus like Shiomi. Not bad. Shiomi's comment took Waver by surprise. Ha 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 ha. See what I said? Iskander beamed with satisfaction. Magus are often too obsessed with magecraft itself and neglect how to actually solve problems. That's the real issue. Shiomi glanced at Waver. He considered it, but decided against mentioning that he had already taken Alkanith's camp. Is that so? Waver responded with skepticism, though deep down he was clearly pleased. The standards of practical magus really were different. So then, King of Conquerors, what's your real purpose for coming here tonight? Shiomi decided to cut to the chase. Iskander hadn't started eating, nor had he poured anyone a drink. It was obvious he was waiting for something. Of course, it's battle. But not with weapons or noble phantasms. Rather, a clash of spirits over wine. I want to ask Saber and Berserker. No, the King of Knights and Morgan. About their respective kingly bearing. It seemed Iskander already knew their true names. Whether he had figured them out himself or someone from another camp had deliberately leaked the information was unclear. After all, Assassin was still active in the shadows. Even Shiomi couldn't guard against everything. But that wasn't the main concern. I am indeed a king, but how could my sister be one? Artoria was well aware that Morgan had never once claimed the title of king. No, King of Knights. The one before you has indeed reigned as a king. Perhaps you just weren't aware of it. Iskander spoke seriously, confident in his judgment. He was sure he hadn't misread her. Morgan simply smiled calmly. I did indeed reign as the Winter Queen. I will not refuse your challenge. Winter Queen. Yet another title absent from legend. Hearing that self-proclaimed title, Shiomi was momentarily surprised, though his expression didn't show it. So, you're proposing a contest of character among heroic spirits, to see if each side can acknowledge the other's strength. If everyone accepts, then the answer will naturally reveal itself? Shiomi quickly understood Iskander's intent. Iskander grinned broadly. Exactly. You truly are sharp. Why don't you serve as the host of this Holy Grail quiz? Huh? Shiomi blinked. Why me? No need to be modest, God Slayer. A flash of brilliant golden light burst forth as Gilgamesh stepped into the courtyard. He wasn't clad in golden armor, but a white robe, snakeskin pattern pants, and white leather shoes. Gold accessories adorned his wrists and neck, radiating unmistakable opulence. With someone like you hosting this banquet, it's worth my time to sit and listen to these mongrels spew their nonsense. Shiomi had the growing sense that events were veering into something completely incomprehensible. Whether it was the Holy Grail quiz or how Gilgamesh addressed him. The only thing he could say for certain was that tonight, at least, there would be no fighting in this courtyard. Chapter 45, a singular banquet. However, he hadn't expected Gilgamesh to be invited to. Shiomi had no doubt this was yet another one of Iskandar's impulsive whims. I didn't expect you to choose such a cramped and suffocating place to host a banquet of kings. That alone speaks volumes about your worth. I came here specifically. How do you plan to apologize? Though Gilgamesh had taken a seat, his crimson eyes stared arrogantly at the king of conquerors. Ryder simply laughed, brushing off the provocation, and opened the wine barrel, pouring into the goblet Shiomi had provided. Don't kill the mood. You chose to come here yourself, and you're late. So naturally, you drink first. He picked up a wine cup and handed it to Gilgamesh. Though the king of heroes looked as unapproachable as ever, ready to explode at the slightest insult, he accepted the goblet without hesitation and downed it in one swift gulp. This was a challenge. And as a king, refusing the cup was not an option. Clearly, Gilgamesh recognized this and had every intention of asserting dominance over the banquet. TCH. What is this swill? You expect to measure the worth of a hero with such trash? As he spoke, the space beside him twisted. A golden gate emerged. Not to summon weapons, but to produce a gleaming, golden wine vessel. It descended slowly to the ground, and by then, Gilgamesh had already taken out 5 more goblets. Evidently understanding the gesture, the king of conquerors poured a serving for Shiomi as well, acknowledging his combat strength on par with the 4 heroic spirits. Gilgamesh's wine was both fierce and smooth, rich and exhilarating. Its overpowering taste overwhelmed the nose, dulled the eyes, and even numbed the skin. Shiomi had to pinch the bridge of his nose, steadying himself with magical energy to avoid immediate intoxication. He rarely drank, and this intensity was far beyond his limit. Is there nothing lighter? Shiomi muttered. Rock's barley wine should be relatively mild, shouldn't it? Gilgamesh let out a lazy smile. My treasury holds only the finest of treasures. Whether wine or weapons. As for ale, a product of my lands, if you want it, go fetch it yourself. Shiomi had clearly underestimated how unreasonable Gilgamesh could be. He gave up arguing and shifted the topic. Fine. Since I'm the only one who can apparently meet your standards as a host, I'll do it. He raised his cup and looked across the rim at the gathered servants. Let me ask you all this. Participating in the Holy Grail War means you each have a wish you've entrusted to the Grail. That's why you answered your master's summons, isn't it? As he spoke, Shiomi's gaze landed on Morgan. This was the perfect opportunity to hear her true intentions. To glimpse who she really was. The Witch of Britannia and similar titles surely didn't tell the whole story. You've misunderstood the premise, Godslayer, Gilgamesh interrupted. To assume this is a battle for the Holy Grail is already a violation of logic. Shiomi was momentarily stunned. Now that his true name had been exposed, he realized Gilgamesh wasn't just spouting nonsense. That so? Well, regardless, this Holy Grail clearly isn't the Great Chalice of Rock. Shiomi narrowed his eyes. Which means it doesn't exist in your treasury, King of Heroes. This entire planet is my garden. And everything within it belongs to me. That was all Gilgamesh said. Then there's no room for discussion. Shiomi clicked his tongue. Iskandar grinned and cut in cheerfully. So in other words, King of Heroes, we need your permission to obtain the Grail? I have no reason to grant my treasures to mongrels like you. Gilgamesh's smile remained, but his crimson gaze sharpened. My grace is for my subjects and my people. If any of you are willing to submit to me, I wouldn't mind rewarding you with a cup or 2. It was an impossibility. Every servant present was a king in their own right. None of them would ever submit to another. So what is your purpose in participating in the Holy Grail War, King of Heroes? Shiomi asked. Of course, it is to punish the thieves who seek to steal treasures from my vault. At that, the King of Heroes locked eyes with Shiomi. But you are different, Godslayer. You're not like the mongrels that infest this era. You're worth observing. If you can pass my trial, I will even grant you the Holy Grail as a reward. Shiomi frowned slightly. You've been calling me Godslayer this whole time, but I don't recall ever killing a god. I have a name, you know. Oh. Gilgamesh smiled with amusement but clearly had no intention of changing how he addressed him, nor of offering any explanation. Then I shall call you Godslayer King. Ha 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 ha. Everyone else present found this strange as well, clearly curious. After all, a mortal who had slain a god and still walked among them in this era. It was no different from a living legend. Unfortunately, those in the know weren't inclined to share, leaving no way to dig deeper. Shiomi ignored Gilgamesh's uproarious laughter and turned his gaze, handing the spotlight to the King of Conquerors. Meeting his gaze, the usually bold Iskander looked uncharacteristically sheepish. To obtain a physical body. That's what I wish for. The answer was so unexpected that Waver couldn't help but shout out and rush to Ryder's side. You. Didn't you say your wish was to conquer the war? Wah. Waver was flicked on the forehead by Iskander and toppled backward onto the grass. To obtain a physical body. Shiomi was surprised by how unsurprised he was. He understood the intention immediately. It's not to realize a wish through the Holy Grail, but to gain the means to fulfill that wish. You really get it. Iskander laughed heartily in praise. Shiomi only turned away and drank in silence. He didn't claim to understand Iskander. But he had learned many things from a certain queen. Even in a land of death, that person had never once abandoned her role as a queen. Just by watching her, Shiomi had came to fully understand what it meant to be a king. And for that, you intend to take my treasure? Gilgamesh asked. Of course. To stand proud with my own body, facing heaven and earth. That is the essence of conquest. To act, to advance, to realize one's purpose. That is my path to domination. But right now, I don't even have a body of my own. How can I take even the first step? As Iskander spoke, the servants around the table all wore various degrees of serious expressions. Gilgamesh, however, looked at Iskander with a deadly, solemn glare. I've decided, Ryder. I will execute you myself. Chapter 46, King of Heroes, Take the Blame. It was clear that the King of Heroes had already begun to regard Iskander as his true rival in the Holy Grail War. But the King of Conquerors didn't seem to mind. Like Gilgamesh, he simply kept smiling, enjoying the modest banquet. Shiomi was about to turn the conversation over to Morgan when she spoke first, catching his gaze halfway. I have no wish to entrust to the Holy Grail. What? Artoria was stunned. Iskander and Gilgamesh also revealed varying degrees of surprise, while Waver and Irazviel were visibly incredulous. A servant with no wish? Morgan, unmoved by anyone's reaction, offered a vague explanation. If you must know, I already obtained what I wanted upon arriving in this Holy Grail War. My pursuit of the Grail is nothing more than a gesture of appreciation to my master. My husband. For all he's done. Her words sounded contradictory, like a convenient lie waiting to be torn apart. But no one questioned her. Though Morgan hadn't said what it was she'd gained, it was also clear she hadn't lied. Ho ho. Don't tell me what you really wanted was to be tonight's master of ceremonies. Iskander joked. Mysterious and unreadable as she was, he couldn't pass judgment on this witch. Still, the regal aura she carried was unmistakably real. Morgan swirled her wineglass and took another sip. I'll let you guess, King of Conquerors. She shifted her gaze to Artoria, who was quietly eating beside her. It seems you've been very curious about my purpose. But unfortunately, now that I've achieved it, I have no reason to share the whole truth. She regarded Artoria with mocking eyes. So then, will you still share your own wish with the others? Artoria set her food down. Though she had seemed to enjoy the food earlier, her composure never faltered. Nor did she forget the reason she was here tonight. Well then, let's hear it, Morgan said casually, as if she had taken Shiomi's role as moderator. Shiomi didn't mind at all. He simply listened in silence, glad to be out of the spotlight. My wish is to save my homeland. I want to use the Holy Grail, the all-powerful wish machine, to change the fate of Britannia's destruction. Her righteous declaration left the entire gathering in silence. But wasn't Britannia destroyed during your reign, at the conclusion of your final battle? Shiomi raised an eyebrow, breaking the quiet with a pointed question. That's exactly why I regret it. I want to change that ending. It was all because of me. Before she could finish, Gilgamesh let out a distorted laugh. Hey, did you hear that, Ryder? She calls herself a king, even revered by her people as one. Yet she regrets it? Ha 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 ha. Ryder remained solemn and said nothing. Artoria's expression tightened in anger at the insult, and just as she was about to respond, someone else spoke first. It is indeed laughable, but are you really in a position to laugh, King of Heroes? Morgan's sudden words cut through the air, redirecting the tension toward Gilgamesh and bringing his laughter to an abrupt halt. In its place came a sharp, hostile pressure. The arrogant King of Heroes would never tolerate criticism lightly. He fixed Morgan with a cold stare. To speak such insolence. You must be prepared to defend yourself, Fairy of Paradise. Even if you bear no guilt, daring to point your finger at this king is already a capital offense. Yet Morgan stood unfazed in the face of killing intent thick enough to feel like an army pressing down. Don't be so quick to judge. This will take some explaining. Listen to the end before deciding whether it's true, King of Heroes. She set down her wine cup and let her gaze sweep across the group. Among them, Artoria looked the most confused of all. She had never imagined that her sister would speak up in her defense. let alone shift the blame for Britannia's destruction onto the King of Heroes, a man she'd only ever heard about in legends. "What are you trying to say, Morgan?" she asked. Morgan didn't even glance at Artoria, keeping her gaze fixed forward. "To put it simply, you misunderstood the cause from the start. The fall of Britannia wasn't the result of any one person's failure. It was already a predetermined fact. You only delayed it by force, giving your Britannia a little more time under your reign." Then, in an almost casual tone, Morgan laid bare the essence behind Britannia's fall, leaving Artoria speechless. Of course she had always known that Britannia would eventually be destroyed. Merlin had told her so before she even took the throne. That was why she had hoped it could meet its end in a more peaceful way. "I know that much. But what does it have to do with the King of Heroes over there?" "The fall of Britannia," Morgan said, turning her gaze to Gilgamesh, "was merely one part of the greater retreat of the Age of Gods from the world." Gilgamesh, moments ago consumed by rage, began to calm. His expression, though still unpleasant, returned to its usual coldness. Originally, the Age of Gods was supposed to end around 1000 BC, but because Britannia sits closest to the inner sea of the planet, the process was delayed by 1500 years. She turned back to Artoria with a faint, mocking smile. "If you want to change that reality, to prevent Britannia from perishing, you'd need to use the Holy Grail's power to reverse the regression of the Age of Gods itself." Artoria fell silent. If Britannia's destruction was the result of the gods' departure, then no peaceful resolution could ever have been possible. Then what does this decline of the Age of Gods have to do with that gold glitter over there? Iskander looked over at Morgan. She smiled faintly. "It's simple. Gilgamesh, the King of Heroes, was one of the key reasons the Age of Gods began to collapse. When he chose to lead mankind in rebellion against the gods, the decline began. The act of the King of Magecraft returning divine miracles to the heavens only accelerated the process. Because of that, lands that were once lush and bountiful became barren, unable to sustain the people who lived on them. Artoria. It's no wonder your Britannia fell." Then, looking back at Gilgamesh, she asked with a smirk, "Well? Did I say anything inaccurate? From this perspective, doesn't the responsibility for Britannia's destruction rest with your rebellion against the gods, King of Heroes?" All eyes turned to him. But Gilgamesh didn't deny it. He merely scoffed. "How dull. Even if it's true, that doesn't make it any less boring." Chapter 47, Gold Glitter Age of Gods. Many classy remained aloof, yet didn't deny Morgan's statement. So what Berserker said was true? Iskander couldn't help but show some interest. His reign had been over 300 years before the Age of Man, and it had already been more than 700 years since the King of Magecraft returned the mystery. The Age of Gods still felt somewhat distant to Iskander. "Fools. You don't understand the Age of Gods at all, nor do you grasp the true nature of gods," Gilgamesh sneered. "The King of Heroes, born from the union of a mortal king and a goddess, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, naturally understood the existence of gods better than anyone present." Gilgamesh slightly raised his chin and looked down at everyone with arrogance. "The Age of Gods has long since passed. This planet now operates under the physical laws known to humanity. To people like you, gods are nothing more than systems used to support religion. You can't comprehend the Age of Gods, don't understand gods, and it's no wonder you fail to grasp the meaning behind my actions." Morgan's earlier words had struck a nerve, and Gilgamesh suddenly felt inclined to speak to them about the concept of gods. There are two kinds of gods. Those that originally existed as something else and became gods, and those born as gods from the start. In Mesopotamia, where I reigned, gods were the personified consciousness of natural phenomena. What you would call the ancient gods. I was created through the will of these ancient gods and human kings, existing between ancient and modern divinity. He grinned and drank deeply from his cup. "Strange, isn't it? Even I think so. But it's the truth. I was created by the will of the gods. A king who was created. You could call it manufactured. Not born of nature, but brought into being for a specific purpose. In that sense, Artoria Pendragon is the same. She was born from a conspiracy between her father, King Uther, and Merlin, a non-human king with the blood of the Red Dragon." Artoria was somewhat aware of this, and her expression turned serious upon hearing Gilgamesh's words. Even if they were unrelated, if the fall of Britannia was tied to the fading of the Age of Gods, then why did the King of Heroes, who initiated that decline, do so? To guide humanity? You're not that charitable, are you? Shiomi asked. Good instincts. The gods didn't create me to help humanity. They feared humanity, and needed a mediator who could see from both divine and human perspectives, Gilgamesh said, arrogance laced with a hint of approval. The ancient gods feared humanity's ability to reshape nature. No matter how much natural energy they possessed, in the end, They were just entities confined to specific locations. His words carried no reverence for the gods, even though 2/3 of him came from them. Grinning as if amused, Gilgamesh continued, humans are the opposite. Their survival ability may differ, and as individuals they're tiny, like grains of sand. But when gathered in large numbers, their average potential is quite high. The conversation began to delve into deeper territory, directly tied to Gilgamesh's response. Those gods, despite being mighty natural phenomena, had originality and cognitive ability no greater than that of ordinary people. Even with omniscient knowledge, they could only reach a single conclusion and shape a single personality. On this point alone, humanity has already surpassed them. The gap in cognition and capacity for change is far too vast. Gilgamesh's smile deepened, his contempt for the gods plain to see, though he showed no dissatisfaction with himself. Human desire is endless. It never stops and never hesitates to show itself. The gods realize that the world would eventually change because of it. One day, it might even alter the laws that govern the stars. When that time comes, there would be no room left for the ancient gods, who exist as natural phenomena, to intervene. Fearing that future, the gods sought a ruler. Someone born human, yet belonging to their divine camp. That was the true reason behind their foolish decision to unite a human king with a goddess and give birth to me. It was a desperate act of survival in their twilight, and from the gods' perspective, utterly disgraceful. Gilgamesh dismissed the will of the gods with arrogant disdain. The gods only wanted to use me as a wedge. A tool to drive between heaven and earth. To stop the gap between humanity and the divine from widening further. Once I saw through that pitiful scheme, I came to a decision: the age ahead has no place for gods. This planet should be ruled by humanity. By those I lead. And so, humanity severed its ties with the divine and stepped toward a future it would shape on its own. But Gilgamesh's actions were only the beginning. The gods continued to cling to their ties with humanity until, 1500 years later, during the era of the king of Magecraft, even mystery was returned to the heavens. That's why I said it stole, fairy of paradise. Gilgamesh drained his cup but didn't refill it. You do know quite a few truths, but you don't understand what they mean. Shiomi leaned toward Morgan and whispered, so much for shifting the blame. Even if the age of gods ended because of him, the king of heroes clearly doesn't intend to take responsibility for Britannia's destruction. If he did, he wouldn't be the king of heroes, Morgan replied just as quietly. Iskander let out a thoughtful sigh. Even if you were created by the gods, you have no intention of following their will. You'll act as king by your own judgment. Whether that means ruling the land or cutting ties with the gods. Exactly. That is my way as king. Those commoners who beg for heaven's mystery will never understand. After finishing his tale, Gilgamesh's words began to drip with narcissism. Fitting for someone with a nature as self-centered as his. So tell me, Saber. Now that you know the reason I brought the Age of Gods to an end, are you still going to come after me for reparation, just as your sister claimed? Gilgamesh asked, visibly amused. Artoria's brow furrowed, but she answered firmly. Even if the end of the Age of Gods was your doing and that led to Britannia's fall, the destruction of my country is my responsibility. It has nothing to do with you, King of Heroes. Chapter 48, abandoned halfway. A quiet sigh echoed after Artoria finished speaking. The one who sighed was Morgan. Unlike the disapproval in Iskander's expression or the mockery that followed Gilgamesh's words, a touch of melancholy appeared on the witch's snow-pale face. No one knew why she sighed. Even knowing the truth, understanding how it ends, you still cling to the dream of saving Britannia? A trace of reluctance and resignation flickered in Morgan's eyes. No matter how much I want to distinguish myself from you, in the end. In some ways, you and I really are the same kind of person. Artoria fell silent and sat back down. Maybe. They were fundamentally incompatible, destined to reject each other's very existence. Yet Artoria knew, though she had never said it aloud, that Morgan loved Britannia almost as much as Artoria did. But, Morgan continued, this time to everyone present, whether it's to gain the strength to conquer the world, to punish the thief who stole your treasure, or to save your ruined homeland. Your motivations, your goals, all hinge on the omnipotent wish-granting machine, the Holy Grail. Without it, none of this could proceed. Iskander fixed Morgan with a sharp stare. And what are you getting at? Don't tell me you're trying to convince everyone to give up on the Grail now, at the 11th hour? There's no need for that. Morgan idly turned the exquisite golden wine cup in her hand. If you want the Holy Grail, go ahead and fight for it. Isn't that why you entered the Holy Grail War in the first place? Of course. That's assuming the Holy Grail in Fuiuki can actually grant your wishes. Iris Veil, who had stayed silent and had no intention of joining the heroes' debate, could no longer remain a passive listener. What are you talking about? Berserker, The Holy Grail War is a system created jointly by the Innsburn, Tosaka, and Mata families. Its ultimate purpose is to summon the Holy Grail and obtain the omnipotent wish-granting machine. Iris Veal couldn't grasp the meaning behind Morgan's words. Even if it isn't a treasure like the Great Cup of Rock, it is still, without question, an omnipotent wish-granting machine. 9 years ago, Garrett Suguemiya accepted the Innsburn family's invitation, and it was there he met Iris Veal. Iris Veal firmly believed that her husband's wish could be realized through the Holy Grail, and from the depths of her heart, she understood what Garrett Sugu longed for. So even knowing that, as the Lesser Grail, she would never escape the Holy Grail War, she still willingly chose to give everything for the man she loved. Hey, Berserker, what are you even talking about? Waver looked utterly confused. He started wondering if this servant had already lost her mind due to mad enhancement. Maybe she only seemed coherent. What if she'd been spouting nonsense from the start? How else could anyone say something so bizarre? You still haven't noticed? The Holy Grail War system in Fuiuki was originally designed to summon heroic spirits from different eras to serve as servants. But this time is different. The one summoned under the caster class doesn't even qualify as a heroic spirit. Morgan glanced around with a faint, mocking smile. Calling that kind of servant an evil spirit or a vengeful ghost would be far more accurate. Her words sent a jolt through everyone present. It was true. Aside from caster, all the other servants had made names for themselves in history or legend. But Gilles de Race was an exception. He had once been a hero of the 100 Years' War, yes. But everything he did afterward was etched into human history as horror stories, which over time twisted him into something monstrous. An evil spirit. Please. Explain more clearly. Iris Veal's voice trembled, and sweat glistened on her pale forehead. Ever since Lancer's fall, her body, acting as the Lesser Grail, had absorbed the soul of the first servant. Since then, her bodily functions had slowly started to shut down. Even sitting here and speaking now was already pushing her to the limit. But what Berserker said next hit her like a bolt of lightning. To put it simply, the Holy Grail has gone mad. Morgan's voice was eerily calm as she dropped the bombshell into the stillness of the courtyard. Gilgamesh raised an intrigued eyebrow. Compared to ordinary treasures, something mad was far more worth his attention. Iskander and Artoria, meanwhile, were visibly shaken. Gone mad? What do you mean? Iskander scowled. He wasn't about to entrust his wish to a faulty wish-granting device. Doesn't look like she's joking. No. There's no way. How could this be happening? Artoria struggled to accept the idea. So far, all they had was Morgan's claim. Even if she pointed to Castor as evidence, it could still be chalked up to coincidence. Or blamed on the fact that Castor's master was a serial killer, which might explain the kind of servant summoned. But they didn't have time to think it over. A sudden wave of unnatural cold swept through the area. Even through the Shiomi family's bounded field, which was supposed to filter out magical signals, the chill was palpable. Waver's long dormant magic circuits jolted awake, sending sharp pings through his body. This ominous magical surge. Shiomi turned sharply toward the disturbance. Iskander and Artoria followed his gaze. Clearly, tonight's banquet was over. Without any conclusions reached. Someone had already ignited the flames of war near the Mayan River. 4 servants were gathered here. Though news of Lancer's defeat hadn't spread yet, Saber's side already knew. Assassin didn't have the capacity to produce such overwhelming magical energy, which left only one possibility. It's Castor, Morgan said flatly. This kind of magical fluctuation matches a multiverse ceremonial incantation. The mana output is equivalent to dozens of people. In an instant, Morgan had gauged the scale of the ritual. Humphrey. Looks like some mongrels don't intend to spend the night peacefully, Gilgamesh said as golden light shimmered around him. His form faded into spirit mode and vanished from the Shiomi courtyard, leaving only his voice echoing behind. Fight your hardest. Hunt down Castor and the rest. Show me what you're worth, ha 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 ha. As the laughter faded, Iskander rose from the blanket, grabbing a sandwich and downing it in a single bite. If they dare interrupt the banquet, then we'll clean up Castor tonight. Along with whatever we missed earlier. Chapter 49, The Blasphemous Feast. Tenkai Shiomi's car sped through the streets, heading straight for the banks of the Mayan River. The 2 members of Saber's camp buckled their seatbelts, joining Shiomi and Morgan in action. They hadn't chosen to ride with the King of Conquerors again. Clearly, Iris Veal's body couldn't handle any more jolting. A smoother, more stable ride was the only option. Still, they hadn't expected Shiomi's driving to be so aggressive. Then again, with massive magical energy equivalent to dozens of people being unleashed by the river, there was no time to waste. Whether they were there to take down Castor or to stop the Holy Grail War from spilling over into the civilian world. The roads of Mama Town were old and tangled, but after over 2 years living there, Shiomi knew them like the back of his hand. His home was his workshop. His stronghold. Knowing the terrain around it was a necessity. What would normally be a 30-minute drive took just a few minutes. The four of them arrived at the embankment of the Mayan River. Though a thick fog blanketed the river tonight, it didn't affect the servants' vision. And for magi like Xiaomi and Iris Veil, reinforcing their sight with magical energy allowed them to pierce through the mist and clearly perceive the source of the magical surge at the river's center. Castor stood alone in the middle of the river, his feet resting atop a mass of grotesque black shadows gathered beneath the water. Creatures that made it possible for him to stand on the surface. It looks like this spell has been in preparation for over 2 hours. Otherwise, even with Castor's abilities, and a noble phantasm that serves as both a magical reactor and a scriptorium for complex rites, he couldn't possibly have completed this in mere minutes, Morgan observed coolly. Just as she said, Castor wasn't chanting. He simply stood there, waiting patiently for the grimoire in his hand to finish the spell on its own. Strangely enough, although he had noticed the figures on the river bank, he showed no interest in them at all. After acknowledging their presence, he simply returned to focusing on the ritual. Fiend. What are you plotting tonight? Artoria shouted in fury. Deeply sorry, holy maiden, but I don't have time to receive you right now. Castor's tone was unusually serious, devoid of any emotion. At this moment, I'm conducting an unprecedented, blasphemous banquet in honor of my master. Should you choose to attend, it would be my greatest delight. Castor burst into laughter as the dark waters around his feet began to churn. Countless abominations lurking beneath the surface stretched out their hands and gradually pulled the black-robed mage asunder. This isn't good. Morgan instantly recognized the threat. She raised a hand, swiftly constructing a spell above Castor's head and launching an immediate strike. But the magical bombardment was blocked by the tentacles of the sea demons. Though a small breach opened, it was instantly healed, fully engulfing Castor once more. Now let us raise the banner of salvation once more. Gather, all you who were abandoned. Gather, all you who were oppressed. I shall lead you. I shall reign over you. The resentment in our hearts shall ascend to the heavens. O Lord above. I shall praise you through this act of accusation. Castor's piercing voice tore through the fog, echoing down the length of the river. The roiling water lifted him higher. The number of sea monsters beneath him continued to swell. And given the river's depth, imagining just how many there were sent chills down the spine. It's too late. I was hoping to take out Castor before those sea beasts surrounded him. Morgan lowered her hand with a soft sigh. But now, I'm afraid there's no way to stop him from completing that abhorrent summoning ritual. Xiaomi turned his gaze toward both banks of the river. The chaos Castor had stirred up had already woken the nearby residents. Lights flickered on in house after house. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before uninvolved civilians noticed what was happening. Morgan. Xiaomi called out loudly. A rare thing for him. Realizing his tone was too sharp, he quickly lowered his voice. Can I ask you to? As you wish, my husband. Morgan's voice was gentle, ethereal, almost mechanical in its clarity. Before Xiaomi could even finish, the fog over the Mayan River thickened dramatically. Even Artoria could no longer see where Castor was. Yet, the massive shadow slowly rising from the water, seemingly reaching for the heavens, remained clearly visible. This was exactly what Xiaomi had wanted, to contain the situation before it escalated or drew attention, keeping it hidden from those who had no part in this war. For Morgan, conjuring a mist that blocked perception was as simple as lifting a hand. Thank you, Xiaomi said, solemn and sincere. That's just the kind of man you are, Morgan murmured, suddenly placing a hand against Xiaomi's cheek, oblivious to anyone watching. You act like you only care about the people and things right in front of you, but your ambition. It's vast. Maybe even more than this world can hold. After gently stroking his cheek, she pulled her hand back, summoned her weapon, and shifted into her battle-ready form once again. This time, Xiaomi extended his hand. Let me borrow it. Oh? Morgan didn't hand it over immediately. Aren't you a queen? Then stay in the rear where you belong. No need to rush to the front lines. Xiaomi said plainly. Leave that to me. In that case, I'll look forward to your results. Morgan handed him the weapon. If the situation changes, we'll reassess then. Xiaomi gripped the magic spear. Castor mentioned his master. If that was an order, the master might be nearby. As always. You handle the servant, I'll take care of the master, Morgan nodded knowingly. Just as the two finished their exchange, Artoria, fully armored, stepped forward. Our alliance still stands. If so, allow me to join you on the battlefield, Xiaomi. You're not the only one heading there, Xiaomi replied, just as Iskandar's ox cart touched down by the river bank. Iskandar looked around, baffled. What's going on here? Why is the river suddenly so foggy? Is this another one of Castor's tricks? Just a measure to shield the public, Shiomi explained. King of Conquerors, will you fight alongside me and the King of Knights to bring down Castor? Iskander grinned, clearly thrilled. Ha ha ha. To charge into battle with warriors like you. Splendid. Let me witness your strength for myself on the battlefield. Then he glanced between them. But if the two of you ride my noble phantasm, you won't be able to fight at full power, will you? That won't be necessary. I was blessed by the spirits of the lake. I can walk freely upon the water, Artoria answered calmly, her smile composed. Shiomi traced a rune in the air. Same here. With runes for flight and water resistance, I'll manage just fine. Perfect? Hey, kid. Stay on the shore, Iskander said as he set Waver down from the cart. If anything happens, contact me. Understood, Waver replied. Shiomi gave Morgan one last deep look before turning away, leaping into the air and vanishing into the dense fog above the river. Joined by the King of Knights and the King of Conquerors. Chapter 50, The Bloody Battle at Mayan River. The Mayan River, nearly 20 meters deep, had been completely transformed into a massive, living tank of water. The creatures bred within this monstrous tank were the giant sea beasts summoned by Castor. As they charged from the riverbank onto the water, the fog conjured by Morgan to obscure their sight gradually began to lift, clarifying their vision once again. It was then that Tartoria realized just how numerous the sea demons had become. She swung her sword with force, cleaving through tentacles as wide as 2 or 3 people standing shoulder to shoulder. But the moment they were severed, the tentacles immediately began to regenerate. More limbs, drawn by the disturbance, surged toward her, forcing her to retreat each time she struck. Unlike last night's battle in the forest, there was only one sea monster in the Mayan River. But its countless tentacles were far more troublesome than dozens of the smaller creatures. Saber. Fall back. Shiomi's voice rang out. Artoria leapt from the water's surface, narrowly avoiding a tentacle that tried to ensnare her. With an agile flip midair, she landed beside Shiomi. Without the needing to ask, she saw Shiomi lightly tap the water's surface with the tip of his spear, and the river beneath them immediately began to freeze, forming an ice path that spread toward the sea monster. The tentacles that had been wildly thrashing slowed down, and within moments, they were completely frozen. You froze its movement? Iskander's ox cart hovered in the air. He hadn't just been watching. He had been charging into the swarm of tentacles over and over, but with limited means. Whether by lightning or weapons, his attacks had only inflicted minor damage. This isn't the time to marvel, King of Conquerors. Shiomi raised his hand, and a strong wind swept across the river. The two servants quickly understood what Shiomi was aiming for. First, immobilize the sea monster with a high-level spell, then follow up with a coordinated strike to destroy it. And all its limbs. In one go. Then let me take the lead. You two, don't drag my chariot into this. With a loud laugh, Iskander charged forward in his ox cart, tearing through the frozen river and the monster parts along the way. But his assault only carved a single path. They still needed a much broader attack. Beside him, Artoria was already preparing. No words were needed. Battle instinct kicked in, and she and Shiomi launched their attacks at the same time. Strike air. Vacuum wave. A howling gale, strong enough to tear through flesh, swept across the Mayan River. As Iskander's ox cart soared into the sky, the wind gathered up the frozen sea monsters and shattered them to pieces. Yet despite the devastation, the thick fog over the river remained completely undisturbed. No signs of it lifting. The tremendous magical force behind the attack sent shockwaves across both banks of the river. On the shore, Waver and Irisviel, still observing the battle, instinctively braced themselves as they felt the wind pressure rushing in. Arms raised, eyes shut tight. They waited for impact. But after several seconds, they realized the wind had only brushed past them, roaring by harmlessly on either side. Opening their eyes, they saw that the violent gust had been diverted, split apart by Morgan's magic. And she hadn't even lifted a finger. This alone won't be enough, Morgan said coolly. No sooner had the words left her lips than the tentacles submerged beneath the water, still frozen in ice, began to writhe. Growing at an alarming rate. They surged upward, crashing through the surface in a frenzy, raising towering waves several meters high. That thing. Is it immortal? Waver cried out, despair creeping into his voice as he clutched his head and stomped in frustration. The scale of this battle had long surpassed what a novice magus like him could handle. Part of him couldn't help but envy Shiomi. For being able to fight side by side with legendary heroes. You're the one behind this fog, aren't you, Witch of Britannia? Came a smooth, elegant voice from the side. A man in a dark crimson suit, holding a jewel-tipped wand, approached calmly. You're? Irisviel recognized him immediately. Morgan glanced sideways. So, you're Tokiomi Tasaka, Sakura's father. And master of the King of Heroes? I'm not really in a position to be called Sakura's father right now, Tokiomi replied with a faint smile. Her real father is the one fighting on the Mayan River. Can't you order your servant to intervene? Morgan asked, her tone flat. Tokiomi gave a bitter smile. The King of Heroes acts on his own terms. He looked up. Through the dense fog, Waver and Iris Veal could faintly make out a gleaming golden airship overhead, seemingly forged from gold and emerald. Clearly a noble phantasm. I see. Morgan didn't dwell on it. She turned away, walking along the opposite riverbank. The fog will soon spread over all of Fuiuki. Once it does, the Holy Church and the Mages Association won't have to worry about hiding the truth anymore. As Fuiuki's overseer, I'm grateful, Tokiomi said with a polite bow. Though. May I ask what Her Majesty the Witch plans to do next? Morgan stopped in her tracks. That third-rate magus said it was his master's will. But how would someone who doesn't even understand the Holy Grail War know how to use a command spell? Her implication was clear. Someone was pulling strings from the shadows, using the chaos of the escalating war for their own gain. In that case, please allow me to accompany you, Tokiomi said quickly. As the head of one of the three founding families of the Holy Grail War. If Morgan ended up eliminating Castor's master, credit for the victory would largely go to the Berserker camp. Tokiomi was trying to stake his claim in any way he could. There's no need, Morgan replied curtly. Magus of this era, no matter how well-intentioned, would only get in my way. Then she paused and glanced back. Of course. If you believe you can match my husband's capabilities, that's a different matter. With that, Morgan vanished into the fog. It was only then that the three masters realized just how thick the fog had become. Visibility on both banks of the Mayan River had dropped to near zero. Even with their magical vision fully enhanced, they could only barely make out the silhouettes of Shiomi and the two servants, still locked in fierce combat amid the endlessly regenerating sea monster. Sigh. This is exactly why I say those heroes of old. Tokiomi murmured to himself. Though Waver and Iris Veal both remained cautiously alert, he showed no signs of hostility. Rest assured. The priority now is bringing down Castor's faction. The ones who've ignored the rules and cast aside secrecy. I'm not your enemy. Good to hear, Iris Veal replied firmly. We have no intention of turning this into a petty squabble either. Chapter 51, Haunting Wraiths. Rinazukurayu had no idea what the Holy Grail War was. All he knew was that the man he'd summoned a few days ago, who called himself Castor, possessed an artistic sense far beyond his comprehension. As long as he followed that man, he could witness an art style brimming with coolness and breathtaking spectacles he'd never imagined. Lying on the bridge over the Mayan River, Rinazuk clung to the railing, trembling with excitement, practically waving a flag in exhilaration as he shouted his praises to Bluebeard. He no longer cared that his workshop had been destroyed not long ago. In fact, he couldn't even remember how he had gotten here, or how he had used a command spell to make Castor unleash this magecraft. Even Castor's words. If it's my master, my dear friend, asking, I, Gilles de Race, would never refuse. Failed to make any sense to him. Rinazuk began to wonder if he was so overwhelmed with excitement that he was losing oxygen. His thoughts slowed, his body filled only with overwhelming bliss. Then, the sharp click of high heels echoed in his ears. Confused, he turned his head and only then noticed that, at some point, a thick fog had enveloped the entire area. Even the towering sea monster was now nothing more than a vague silhouette in the mist. There was no one else around, and not a single car passed on the bridge. Everything had gone deathly silent. So then, how had he seen all those sights earlier? Hey, do you know what's going on? The fog just rolled in out of nowhere. As he looked at the silver-haired woman emerging from the fog, Rinazuk didn't even register her stunning face or think about how to extract pain or despair from her. He just dumbly asked his question. So, you're Castor's master? Morgan ignored his inquiry entirely. Rinazuk, clearly dissatisfied, stumbled toward her. Hey, did you hear me? What's with this fog? He reached out, trying to grab Morgan to press for an answer. But before he got close enough to touch her, his whole body was flung backward and slammed to the ground. Ow! Rinazuk raised his head as the world spun around him. Despite it being a winter night, he felt warmer than he ever had in his life. His vision was flooded with crimson. Lying helplessly on the ground, he murmured, so warm. Morgan stood motionless, coldly watching as Rinazukurayu, his limbs severed, bled out beneath her. I've cut off your limbs, yet all you feel is the pain of falling and just enough life left to cling on, Morgan said indifferently. I already gave you one warning, Worm Magus. Did you really think that living a long life meant you could do as you pleased? As her words echoed through the air, a burst of eerie blue flames erupted, engulfing the pedestrian walkway on one side of the Mayan River Bridge. Rinazukura's body began to swell, and just as the wing blade insects were about to burst from his flesh, Both he and his body ignited in flames. Over a dozen sea demons, each taller than a man, dropped from the railings or descended from the beams above. It was now undeniable, Zkenmentu had already taken control of Rinisik's body using his insects while the man was unaware. Though he still retained consciousness and could move freely, he had become nothing more than a puppet of the worm Magus. Zken had even thoughtfully used Rinisik to have Castor arrange for sea demons to lie in ambush here, waiting for any master who might try to take him out. I was trying to bait another master, but ended up hooking a servant instead. What a blunder! Zkenmentu's voice echoed through the thick fog, though he never showed himself. It was clear the decrepit old man was deeply wary of Morgan. Other servants might be manageable, but a magus from the Age of Gods was on an entirely different level. Far beyond the likes of Castor. You can't even raise a proper master, and yet you still dare to chase after the Holy Grail? As one of the three great families, you don't even understand the current state of the Greater Grail, Morgan scoffed. But Zken only chuckled darkly. Naturally, I understand the nature of the Grail far better than fools like you, drawn in by the so-called omnipotent wish grandeur. Is that so? Well, that alone might deserve a bit of praise. But nothing more. Disdain laced Morgan's voice without restraint. Whether it was sea demons or insects, she crushed them all with magecraft, burning them to ash without mercy. In an instant, her section of the Mayan River Bridge looked as if it had just survived a catastrophic disaster. How terrifying. She wiped out waves of familiars without even lifting a finger. Zken's voice was still laced with that sinister laugh. He never had to step into the light. Just hiding in the shadows, watching from above, was enough to keep his smug detachment intact. But Castor's sea demons are endless. How long can you last without a weapon? You'd better run while you can. With that final taunt, Zken's presence vanished completely from the mist. Even Morgan couldn't immediately pinpoint his location. She'd hoped to eliminate the bothersome worm while she had the chance, but once again, he slipped away. A faint irritation flickered in Morgan's chest. The area was in ruins, yet the sea demons kept coming. Unless she destroyed the noble phantasm functioning as their magical energy core, it would take some time to eliminate them all. Growing impatient, Morgan prepared to unleash a larger-scale spell to clear the surroundings. As for the bridge, she would take care not to damage its main structure and risk collapse. After all, she still had plans to take Shiomi and the kids here to play later. She couldn't have the bridge falling apart. In a flash of cold light, another wave of sea demons was swept away. But not by Morgan. Shiomi landed lightly on the scorched railing, now barely holding together, weapon in hand. Castor's sea demon suddenly froze. Did something happen? Shiomi asked. Morgan paused her casting. Nothing serious. I just killed Castor's master. The contract must have been severed, creating an opening. But more importantly, why are you here? I felt you were in a fight, and then Castor's movement suddenly stopped. I was worried, so I rushed over. As soon as he finished speaking, the massive sea demon in the river stirred violently once more. Evidently reacting to its master's death, Castor had begun acting recklessly. Making you worry like that? I must be a terrible wife, Morgan teased, a fleeting softness in her eyes. It's not about that, Shiomi said, extending his hand. No point hanging around here. Want to head to the front together? Morgan took his hand without hesitation. He pulled her up, and she wrapped one arm around him. Together, they leapt from the railing of the Mayan River Bridge, diving through the thick fog as they descended toward the river below. If this keeps up, we'll still be fighting at sunrise, Morgan muttered. So you mean? I'm going to use my noble phantasm. Chapter 52, The Now Unreachable Utopia. As the battle intensified, Morgan wasn't the only one considering the release of her noble phantasm's true name. Artoria was thinking the same. But simply cutting down these tentacles wasn't enough to stop the sea demons from multiplying. Without a way to directly communicate with her true master, Garetsugu Emiya, she needed to confirm things one last time with Ira. By now, the true names of the servants were already known to each other, so there was no longer any need to conceal their noble phantasms. Unlike those that could be activated continuously, hers required a massive amount of mana when the true name was released. Using it recklessly without preparation might burden Garetsugu. Though his injuries had only just healed, and they couldn't speak directly, that didn't mean Artoria was willing to disregard her de facto master and act unilaterally. Just as she was looking for a chance to fall back, a surge of immense mana came from above and to the side. She leapt from the water to dodge, and midair, she caught sight of Morgan. Cradled by Shiomi. Plunging down from the bridge while unleashing magic at the sea demons. The devastating blast of mana temporarily slowed the growth of the tentacles. The two landed together on the surface of the Mayan River, still dotted with floating ice. As expected, simple magecraft only gets us so far. Rather than wasting time on large-scale spells, it's better to release the noble phantasm directly, Xiaomi agreed with Morgan's earlier thought. Morgan nodded. Since we're in agreement, there's no need to discuss it further. But before that, would you let go of me, my husband? I can't exactly fight in this position. Oh. Xiaomi quickly let go, slightly embarrassed. Sorry. He had been too focused on monitoring the sea demon's movements and completely forgot. Not because it felt good holding Morgan close or anything like that. Nearby, Artoria overheard their conversation. Ignoring everything else, she got straight to the point. You're planning to release your noble phantasm, sister? Morgan lightly flexed her fingers. You saw it too, didn't you? At this rate, nothing short of an anti-city class noble phantasm can wipe them out completely. She looked at Artoria with a calm, almost relaxed gaze, as if none of this was enough to make her tense. If you're still reluctant to release the true name of your noble phantasm, then don't force yourself, Morgan said, extending her hand. Xiaomi handed her weapon back to her. There's no point in arguing about who should use their noble phantasm right now, Artoria said as she dashed forward, slicing through the incoming tentacles headed for the two. Since that's your intention, sister, I'll hold them off. No need. Fall back, Artoria. Unless you want to be caught in the blast of my noble phantasm, Morgan cut her off. A tremendous amount of mana began to gather around Morgan, concentrating into her body. Conqueror King, get clear. Now. Xiaomi called out from a distance, signaling to Iskander, who was dashing through the sky, cutting down tentacles as he went. Ryder noticed the rapidly intensifying mana and quickly deduced she was about to unleash a noble phantasm capable of turning the tide. He yanked his reins, steering the ox chariot away to a safe distance. Xiaomi and Artoria retreated as well, stopping at a range that wouldn't interfere with Morgan. Are you that curious about your sister's noble phantasm? Xiaomi asked, eyes fixed on the surrounding sea demons, making sure none would interfere with Morgan's casting. Artoria nodded silently. To the King of Knights, Morgan was both the most familiar and most mysterious person. She was her blood relative. Her older sister. But after Artoria ascended the throne, Morgan rarely showed herself. What kind of noble phantasm did she possess? What kind of heart lay beneath? Artoria didn't know. Even knowing her true name meant little. Morgan's reputation as a witch left the nature of her noble phantasm shrouded in mystery. And now, Morgan was about to unveil it. She spent her entire life unable to set foot in the city, unable to realize her own white Camelot. The laws of the world never allowed her to become the Queen of Britannia. Those unfulfilled wishes ultimately manifested as magecraft, and so she walked a path that was never meant to exist. Her own journey of love and resentment. Xiaomi spoke softly, unsure whether he was addressing Artoria or simply voicing the thought to himself. Its name is. As he spoke, the heavy fog abruptly cleared. The familiar night sky of Fuiuki vanished, replaced by an auroral heavens glowing in shades of blue. A colossal throne had appeared at the place where Morgan stood. Reality marble? Iskander was taken aback. But upon closer inspection, it didn't seem to be that. The transformation of the surroundings appeared more like a visual effect accompanying the noble phantasm's activation. An illusion of sorts.